Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Demon Knight 9395 on Wattpad. Now let's start. The sight of the sludge villain engulfing 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 affirmed everything the world said 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬𝐵 couldn't be. Among the crowd that screamed for the pro-heroes in the scene to do something, Izuku's voice seemed trapped in his throat. Where people gasped at the explosions around them, his breath hitched, his chest heaving with the weight of his failure. All the hope, the dreams he had carried since he was a child, felt like cruel jokes at that moment. He'd always wanted to be a hero like All Might. To save people, to make them smile. But how could he, when he couldn't even move to save his long time ago friend and now current bully at a time like this? And with what Quirk? The irony of the thought almost made him want to laugh at himself, as though he finally understood when Bakugo screamed in his face that he was delusional to want to be a pro-hero. How can the pathetic Deku in any state save anyone with no quirk? Can someone like me without a quirk be a hero like you? Izuku remembered asking All Might this question just a while ago on the rooftop of a building. Where other fans would have been content to find their notebook autographed, Deku had clung, perhaps quite literally, for some sage advice. Deku had just turned 18, but the sight of All Might before he had him wind the clock back to 8. This man saved 100 people so many years ago in his debut and did it with the biggest smile Deku had ever seen. A hero like this surely had words Izuku desperately needed to hear. Izuku was waiting for All Might to say something generic, that he could be a hero, if he worked really hard, or anything really, just to give him a reason to at least try to convince himself he could do it. Even if he didn't have any quirk to show for it, in a world where quirks almost always defined what you can become. But then, the All Might he saw deflated into a thin adult. His voice was as light as his thin stature. A far cry from All Might that Deku had seen on television. Certainly not of the stature of his favorite All Might toy since childhood. Instead of answering his question, he raised his shirt. He revealed a massive scar on his left torso. Again, things All Might didn't have on television. For the first time in his life, Deku had been horrified at something involving All Might. For the first time, All Might wasn't beaming his bright smile. In a few short minutes, All Might told Izuku that he, the world's #1 pro-hero, had been missing his stomach for the past 5 years. He explained vaguely of a battle that had taken place 5 years ago. And this moment they met, right there and then, was the last of the very few hours that he, 𝗧𝗓𝗠, was medically allowed to become All Might in a single day. However, and 𝗧𝗓𝗠 said this with emphasis, he continues to fight as All Might even if it means constantly pushing himself to the brink of death, because evil cannot learn that the symbol of peace is inches away from retirement. They can never learn that. A pro-hero should always be ready to risk his life, All Might told Deku, the hero now as the ordinary human 𝗧𝗓𝗠 for the rest of the day. A pro-hero must risk their life, to push themselves beyond their limits, if it means saving others. Plus ultra. All Might's catchphrase. So, can you risk your life without power? 𝗧𝗓𝗠 asked rhetorically before shaking his head. I don't think so. The sage advice Izuku was looking for. Turn his clock back to the present. All Might's last words to Deku on the rooftop were the exact words Deku remembered before snapping back into what was happening in front of him. You need to be realistic, kiddo. Izuku had to face reality. In the middle of all this, Deku belonged only in the crowd. Not among the pro-heroes trying to defeat the threat in front of them, nor the police trying to contain the situation, not even the reporters aboard helicopters surveying the area. Deku was a mere bystander. He must be content as a bystander. The youngster stared at the person responsible for him crashing down to reality, the sludge villain let loose, his slimy body now expanding to cover much of an alley that had now turned into a war zone, with almost the entirety of 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's body inside of him. What sludge villain had revealed of 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨's head? He nestled against the tip of a slimy tentacle he had transformed into a knife. One move and I'll cut off his head. He screamed before laughing maniacally, knowing how helpless the heroes were. Bubbles started forming around his body, glowing alongside his laughter. And not a second later came the explosions, like firecrackers so awfully close to human contact. Everyone but Deku flinched. While Deku saw Bakugo's signature angst, he also noticed the green of the grime of the sludge villain that held his classmate hostage. It didn't even take a moment for recognition to set in. This wasn't a splash of cold water. For Deku, this chill traced his spine and drained all the color around him. Sludge villain was the guy that All Might fought to save him a few hours ago. Deku's eyes widened. Not because of that fact, but if Toshinori Yagi said Deku caught up with All Might at a bad time, and that All Might could only fight for a few hours a day, then would this mean? The sound of more firecrackers cut Deku's thoughts, and the shockwave of the sludge villain's explosions sent debris spiraling towards the crowd. Death Arms swiftly stopped them with a swift parry while Kamui Woods deflected some with a wall of wood sprouting from his arms. Deku knew these quirks. He had written them in his hero journal and always admired how they used them to save lives. Quirks that I don't have. That All Might couldn't use anymore because he saved me. Where's your precious All Might? The sludge villain yelled tauntingly, no mockingly. The explosions started popping all around him as though mimicking an elevated heartbeat. Sludge villains, no doubt, given his excitement. Even he thinks I've become too powerful. That's right. One among the crowd, an old lady, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 noticed, said in a panicked strain. Where's All Might? That's when the murmurs started. Where's All Might? What happened to All Might? Shouldn't All Might be here by now? Where's All Might? The kid might die. The voices drowned Izuku's ears as more from the crowd began asking a question he knew the horrifying answer to. All Might isn't here because of me. Here he was, powerless, useless, and now directly responsible for someone else's suffering. All Might should have just let him be. He was quirkless, basically useless. All Might said it himself. Izuku couldn't be a pro-hero because he didn't have powers. Not unlike Kaken who, angsty as he may be, Deku knew for a fact would soar in the big leagues. The guilt curled his insides like the hand of a beast twisting Izuku for his own weakness. He bit his lips so hard he tasted blood, and his trembling hands balled into fists. He wanted to scream, to cry, to apologize 1,000 times over, but the words were stuck in his throat. Even then, what could he say? That Kaken will die because of him. The concrete of the ground before him almost became a mirror to his mind, the sounds of screaming still permeating through the air. He wasn't even worth pro-heroes and civilians to panic over. Where is All Might? Someone continued to ask. He isn't here. Maybe someone else with a better quirk will come. Another one of the pro-heroes, Izuku couldn't identify who, said. The sound of explosions permeated the air, as is the muffled laughter of a manic sludge villain. All Might isn't here because of me. The kid might die, another screamed. Die and lose a worthwhile future. And what's left is me, a worthless civilian. Worthless with no quirk. Worthless. The twisting guilt had started to boil in scalding oil. Raw and raging and scorching, beginning to bubble. As people wailed for an All Might that wasn't coming, so too did the pit of despair inside Izuku get filled with something he hadn't recognized before. He began to feel a redness gnawing at him, an anger he didn't know was there this whole time. Anger at Bakugo, who had tormented him for years and, just that morning, told him to jump off a building because he was worthless. Anger at All Might, an idol from his childhood, a man he placed on a pedestal so high he thought nothing could tarnish it. A hero he thought would at least soften the blow but instead chose to plunge a knife into his chest. A hero is worthless without his quirk. Anger at himself, for always taking the abuse, for always thinking maybe someday things would change. For thinking the world would be a kinder place for a quirkless person like him. That maybe, for once, they could stop telling him he was worthless, that he wasn't good enough. All of it years of pain, mocking, rejection, and now the sheer anguish of knowing his actions will lead to the death of a schoolmate came crashing down on him in a wave so overwhelming he thought he might drown in it. It should have been me. Then no one would have to worry. Izuku's eyes darted towards Bakugo's face, still squirming as he tried to get out of the tight grip of the sludge villain, but to no avail. He saw 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 and Death Arms only staring in horror as they waited for someone who could at least deal with this kind of quirk. Why don't they try? Izuku dismissed the thought. 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 would die, of course. They can't try, it was too much of a risk. Sludge villain is made of slime. As long as parts of him are left, they can just reform even when scattered. Even if they manage to separate him, just a tinge of slime on 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 would still leave him at the mercy of the sludge villain. Yes, but why won't they try? Izuku's eyes began to burn. At first, he thought it was from the tears streaming down his face, but the sting grew sharper, hotter, as if someone had just lit a fire behind his eyes. The heat began radiating outward until his head throbbed. BLD, or what he thought was be rushed all around his body, the warmth even reaching all around his head, and especially his eyes. He could feel the heat of all the rage starting to boil. All Might isn't here, so why don't they try? He squeezed his eyes shut, groaning softly, but the pain didn't stop. This was the first time this happened to him, a headache so strong it felt as though his brain was trying to claw its way out of his head. And the burning in his eyes was more of actual fire than sheer warmth. He couldn't understand any of it. He only knew that this all felt like a primal urge that only now had the opportunity to let loose. And the only way the pain subsided was when he started to think. Think about what? There's no one here with enough power to separate the sludge villain. Their quirks are too solid. They cannot split the sludge villain without hitting 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽. That's the risk they couldn't take. They are pro-heroes. Surely they can think of some other way. Deku had to massage his temple with a few fingers. He did so vigorously as the pain turned into frustration. There isn't a pro-hero in the area with that kind of quirk. Of course, the choice is to wait for backup. But why aren't they trying? There's the matter of the explosion too. Somehow, the sludge villain can also produce explosions with crackling sounds similar to 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's, the explosions. Then came the loudest ringing Izuku had ever heard in his life. Like thunder before lightning, the ringing lasted a split second before a pounding hit his head with a force that felt as though enough to shatter glass. The pain didn't subside. The raging heat swelled even more. The throbbing only intensified, like something deep inside his soul was telling Izuku he was too stupid to only realize it now. Sludge villain has two quirks. He has the properties of a slime, and he can create explosions. The throbbing became a pulsating sensation, like his head was about to explode. Like he was missing something. Wait, two quirks? Izuku massaged his temple. The pain started to circle his head, intensifying around his eyes. They burned when he blinked. They burn when he doesn't do anything. Izuku felt his body get hotter because of the pain, like he could pass out at any moment. You can't. Not now. Think to ignore the pain. Izuku tried to get the noise of the panicking crowd out of his head. He tilted his ear to the side, trying to mimic the ringing he'd just heard. The pain shifted to where he was leaning, his eyes still burning, his surroundings beginning to sharpen as the heat had started drying the tears in his eyes. I've never encountered anyone anywhere having more than one quirk. Izuku recalled everything he's ever obsessed about until now: news clippings of pro-heroes, footage of their exploits, theories in forums, his own hero journal where he documented the quirks of his favorite heroes. To his knowledge, he hasn't encountered anyone with more than one quirk. A quirk with two separate properties. There's quirks with weird properties, but they often work in tandem with each other. 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 can control everything about wood. Death Arms has large arms that give him super strength. Correlation. Always correlation. Sludge villain had a slime body and could cause explosions like 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽. And he coincidentally absorbed a hostage with the explosion quirk. That doesn't make sense. The throbbing had paused for just the slightest second. Unless he gets the quirk of the person he absorbs. The throbbing continued, worse this time, like a sculptor pounding a hammer brutally onto a chisel. Parts of his head stung with a sharp pain that made Izuku gasp and recoil, his eyes turning warmer than ever. He darted his eyes upwards, gazing at the sludge villain who, for the past minutes, had been causing explosions all around him. None of the explosions had hit civilians, a fortunate occurrence to take advantage of. A luxury Izuku was using to think, as for some ungodly reason, his anger had been causing the worst headache of his life. Either way, in his hubris, the sludge villain's taunting will give pro-heroes the time to plan their next move. In retrospect, was it really hubris? Was it the sludge villain not knowing how to use Bakugo's explosion quirk? Does it matter? A voice in his head responds. Just might. And Izuku responds. That means he doesn't have control over the quirk he absorbs. A pulsing sensation had hit Izuku from the inside of his head. The burning in his eyes started to worsen, like they would melt at any moment. But if he can't control it, can he hit himself? The throbbing grew stronger and more methodical this time, like a metronome starting to breathe life into a painful melody. It's like somewhere, deep past all the pain, is a voice telling Deku that the pieces are coming together. And if his own explosions hit his slime body. Death Arms had an ear to his comms while 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐸 walked away to talk with more of the police in the area. Izuku couldn't understand what they were saying. Something about demands. The throbbing began to worsen as he walked towards them. The idea was stuck in his head. He had to get it out. Death Arms, Deku started, stammering from both the pain and the embarrassment. I might have a 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐸𝐴. True to his name, Death Arms did have large arms. Death Arms extended an arm in front of him, the teenager now facing a palm the size of his face. Deku was taken aback. He was quite literally signaled to talk to the hand. Let the pros do it, kid, Death Arms said, eyes still on the sludge villain. Get away before you get hurt. Izuku noticed the police officers already making his way before he could even react. It didn't take long before Arms started to gently nudge him to a dedicated civilian area. From the sounds around him, the standoff was becoming worse. Truth be told, Deku couldn't even pay attention because the headaches were becoming worse. They won't listen because I'm a civilian. Deku scanned the area for any pro-hero he could approach, to talk to, hoping to clear the pain in his head. The throbbing forced him to think. Who had a quirk capable of pulling off what he was thinking? Who would listen? Why would they listen? Why would they listen to a quirkless? Deku gazed upon the sludge villain, still laughing while explosions peppered the street like fireworks. The other pro-heroes in the area had been clearing civilians or catching debris, being careful not to provoke the villain who still had the youngster inside him. Izuku can still hear people around him ask for All Might, and the police telling them they're waiting for a pro-hero with the right quirk to fight the sludge villain. It's always about the quirk. Finding the right quirk. Izuku, despite his head throbbing like there was no tomorrow, bred to focus his sights towards his classmate. There he was, Bakugo, as angry as ever, struggling to free himself from the sludge villain's grasp. Quirk. Always about quirks. Izuku couldn't see them before, but the warmth in his eyes helped him see the subtle crackling inside the sludge villain's body where Bakugo's arms were tucked away. Bakugo was trying to create his own explosions, but the villain's slimy body stopped his quirk from activating. Bakugo was, as arrogant as he is, trying to find his own way to escape. Deku could see the confidence in his eyes. He had a quirk, which gave him the freedom to try. Deku's head throbbed at the realization. If you don't have a quirk, you can't try. Deku looked at Bakugo, squirming for release. Deku fought through the pain and zeroed his focus on his schoolmate. Bully. Once upon a time friend. For a second, Izuku was moved back into their favorite playground. Even back then, it was always Deku and his All Might toy. And in front of them, out on the horizon, were the wows and the who, as of everyone surrounding 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫, the youngster proudly showing the cracking happening between his hands like fireworks on command. This was how it always was. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 always forward, striving to be the best. A person with one of the coolest quirks. And this was how it always was. Deku always behind, striving to take a step forward. The distance between Deku and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 on the playground felt exactly the same distance between Izuku and Bakugo now. Deku, the boy without a quirk. Bakugo paused in his efforts as though gathering his strength. He tries again, but to no avail. The sludge villain laughed, probably realizing what Bakugo was doing. The bubbles in his body begin to glow and the explosions happen soon after. The villain laughs at Bakugo's failed defiance. Bakugo squirmed in sheer fury. And for a moment, he and Izuku locked eyes. Within what seemed to be a split second, the recognition within Bakugo's eyes suddenly turned into a look of horror, like he had seen something that shouldn't happen. You can't fight without a quirk. The next thought that arrived in his head was his. But also not. It spoke with an anger he hadn't felt before. A primal urge made Deku shake his head. Susu. For the first time, Izuku defies. The fire had built up too much. Izuku's vision had practically turned red. Heat emanated from his eyes, his face releasing a warmth he could only describe as flushed fury. The stinging in his eyes didn't fade, but he didn't care. He looked at Bakugo, who had started his struggle anew. He's trapped. He knew what he was doing might be pointless. Bakugo also doesn't care. All Might wouldn't care. Izuku rubbed his eyes amid the pain in his head. And the world shifted as he opened them. Colors were now brighter, the edges sharper, the chaos around him even more vivid. Deku's heart began thundering in his chest, the pain in his head starting to dissipate into focus. He recalled the footage of All Might standing atop a school bus, carrying the last of the people he rescued. The world told him he wouldn't make it, but he still saved all those people. All Might defied all odds. All Might always does. But All Might isn't here. The realization felt like yet another bucket of water, this time ice cold, blasting towards Izuku. In his mind's eye, despite the throbbing pain across his head and around his eyes, he dodges it. Not today. For the first time in his life, Deku felt something else, determination. And I can't wait for All Might. It wasn't the blind hope he had clung to all these years, but a burning certainty in his chest. The voices of the crowd melted away, replaced by the rush of BLD in his ears and the singular focus of his mind. So I have to do it myself. And do it he has. For the first time, Deku ran. For the first time, Toshinori Yagi ran. The guilt gnawed at his chest, twisting what was left of his torso in a pain worse than what he was already enduring. He clutched at his shirt, his hand balling into a fist out of sheer frustration. Here he was, the world's #1 pro hero, on the rooftop of a small building overlooking a kidnapping that shouldn't have even happened if not for his own incompetence. Useless was the only thing he could tell himself. He coughed. With BLD, as he predicted. As he felt. Every day his body ached for rest. And every day he denied it. Yet here he was, following Recovery Girl's advice. Better limit yourself than be sidelined forever, was her official but confidential prescription. Toshinori could only chuckle in defeat. Some symbol of peace he turned out to be. Toshinori wasn't among the crowd, but within the very street they barricaded. From his vantage point, he saw the back of the sludge villain he failed to cast and the silhouette of the blonde teenager he had just taken hostage. Beyond them, a few meters away, a police line and comrades who responded to the call. All Might could always trust Kamui Woods and Death Arms to keep the civilians behind them safe. However, he knew their quirks weren't fit to face the sludge villain's regenerating slime. He slammed his fist on the balcony wall in frustration, something that hurt him more than it hurt the concrete beside him. If they were following protocol, this means waiting for someone with the right quirk. Can they afford the time? Toshinori looked helplessly at the teenager at the mercy of the sludge villain and how he squirmed for the past few minutes. A valiant but useless effort. The teenager had no choice but wait for another pro-hero to stop this rampage. Something I could have stopped. Toshinori hated this helplessness. It's precisely this feeling that made him accept Shimura-sensei's offer. That he trained to exhaustion under Gran Torino. That he toured the United States to make sure even villains abroad knew someone would never rest until they were all put to justice. And somehow, years later, All Might will have to rest every couple of fights. Pathetic. Pathetic. Toshinori wanted to close his eyes and surrender the situation to whoever tried to save this kid. He could only pray they succeed. Which is why he opened his eyes as soon as he heard the scream. Worry rushed over his body as Toshinori saw a familiar silhouette beginning to run past the police line. Moments had to pass before Toshinori could fit the features together. It's this kid from earlier. A thorn had pricked something deep within his chest. Toshinori could only grasp at his shirt as he recognized the horror of the sight before him. Explosions were happening around the kid, but he didn't seem to care. He just ran. He would die. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 could only widen his eyes. Because I wasn't there. And yet, that boy kept running. It was a defiant effort for a kid out to save perhaps a friend or even a stranger. It carried the same pacing that All Might felt whenever he rushed towards a fight, nervous, desperate, excited, and most importantly, determined. However, something was different. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 couldn't quite place it. The boy, Izuku he believed his name was, who talked to him was too timid, shy, and passive. He almost pitied the teen, whose dreams of becoming a pro hero were quashed by genetics. A kid destined to lose as soon as he was born. He saw in his green eyes the quiet acceptance of passivity. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 spent a second trying to look at Izuku, to see for himself the kind of courage the kid had carried with his steps. Had the moss green of his eyes turned into an emerald that can shine in the sunset? To his surprise, his eyes stumbled upon crimson. Not just Izuku's eyes. Around his body, amid the smoke and the crackling of explosions, was the faintest hint of reddish mist. It felt like a fever forcing itself out of his body, like a rage violently clawing out. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 had to blink, widen his gaze, almost lean forward, all out of disbelief. The kid had green eyes. And yet the Izuku running towards his friend had the bloodiest tinge of red eyes he had ever seen. He was speechless. The only thing he could remember was the kid's question. Can someone like me without a quirk be a hero like you? The sight of Izuku running ground to a halt in 𝗏𝗏𝗡's mind. Someone without a quirk. Green eyes turning red. A reddish aura. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 shook his head, his hand curling into a fist. The heat from within his body had dispersed around him in smoke. No matter. It doesn't matter. None of this matters if Izuku and the hostage die. The thin and frail adult had focused past the strangeness of Izuku and instead listened intently to the crowd's screams. 𝗏𝗏𝗡, no, All Might knew what he had to do. Despite the screams, Izuku ran. Past the crowds in front of him. Past the police barricade. Past 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 Woods, who took a second to realize what had just happened. Past Death Arms who, as large as his arms might be, couldn't grab a hold of him. Hey kid! Death Arms screamed. He could only scream. Get back here. It's too dangerous. Stop running. But Izuku ran. And ran. This was the fastest Deku ran, but everything felt slow at the same time. Izuku could feel every step he took, the way his shoes rebounded on the cement in front of him, even the dirt his foot scraped back with every panicked step. He felt a strap of his knapsack just slipping his left shoulder, the way it contorted and stretched his school uniform. The throbbing in his head never dissipated, the burning in his eyes never abating. The shooting pain of it all forced Deku to lock his eyes forward, to take in all the details so he could stop feeling his head being torn apart. There was a redness around his vision Izuku hadn't seen before, but everything else was at a clarity he hadn't expected. He saw the granulation of the concrete road below him, how its yellow paint started to lose its luster. He noticed the traffic lights at a distance still working, but with no cars in sight. He saw the gurgling of the sludge villain in front of him, and his eyes contorted in horror at the sight of the kid rushing towards him. This only lasted a moment, because the sludge villain's eyes started to reek of malevolence enough to send shivers down Deku's spine. Why am I doing this? The fear had started to grasp its way towards Deku's psyche, but the pain in his head was too much for him to bother looking away. He maintained his sights towards the villain, even when a voice in his head shrilled in a panic. Why am I running to him? With the way the sludge villain had almost contorted his body back, he asked himself the same thing. And after that he braced himself forward, now laughing as bubbles started to boil around his body, glowing with a subtle light Deku had become all too familiar with. Looks like you have a death sentence, the sludge villain screamed in pure bliss. Let's kill you then. For an instant, Deku heard even 𝗏𝗏𝗡 let out a terrified grunt. Bakugo knew what was going to happen. Izuku knew it too. The voice in his head had crackled in fear, realizing what the next seconds would mean for them. The explosions are coming. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And in a split second, something inside Izuku jolted his sights on the villain. Focus. It's coming. The bubbles from the sludge villain's body stopped glowing, which meant the explosions would be there any second. Izuku almost wanted to brace for impact, to scream at himself how stupid he was to get in without a plan. No, he realized, remembering. A foot almost tripped because his body wanted to flinch, but the burning pain in his mind forced him to jump back. I have to see this through. Assuming the sludge villain had taken Bakugo's power, he has a copy of his explosion quirk. Izuku remembered Bakugo using it either directly outside his palms or a little over his body. This might be why the sludge villain's explosions sent debris towards the crowd, not the explosions themselves. It would make sense to brace for impact because explosions had happened around where Izuku was stepping. However, Deku thought, why would I have to flinch when the explosions can't follow me? In that case, the crackling was the cue. As soon as he heard the faintest trace of a crackling sound, the foot he had just stepped forward sprung him back. Smoke filled the area in front of him as explosions peppered where he once stood. Izuku could feel a stinging pain as some debris shot up around his arm, but he'd gotten so used to 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's explosions that the sensation felt more familiar than horrifying. Izuku wanted to cough through all the smoke around him, but his theory was right. The sludge villain can't control the explosion quirk. But this is just half the fight. It would only take moments for the smoke to dissipate fully and he would open for another attack. It's as though the throbbing in his head also knew this, and the pain started to swell around his head again. What's next? What would a pro hero do? Izuku's mind scanned what he's written in his hero journal, of the quirks of his favorite pro heroes and the ways they used them on television. He was looking for something, anything, that they did when fighting with smoke. Normally, a pro hero would use smoke to mask a powerful attack, but it's not like Deku had anything resembling that. Izuku's mind raced. He knew he was running out of time and he hasn't planned this far ahead. He didn't want to fight the sludge villain, he just wanted to save 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 no matter what it took. Izuku's mind paused at the thought. Save 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨. For a moment, the pain cleared when Izuku knew what he had to do. Even the sludge villain seemed to be waiting for all the smoke to clear. Come on, kid. I'll tear you to shreds. And as though instinctively, a voice replied in a shriek. Tear this. Out of the smoke popped a backpack that zoomed towards the sludge villain. It hit him square in the face, contents spilling around him, a pencil conveniently propping up against one of his deformed eyes. The sludge villain recoiled, screaming in sheer fury. Bubbles had started to glow one after the other, like lights on haywire. Moments later, more explosions peppered the surroundings, causing more of the crowd to scream. And, as Izuku thought, the sludge villain screamed even louder as some explosions happened too close for comfort. Pieces of slime flew around the air as the sludge villain hit himself with his own blasts. The slime around Bakugo slightly recoiled, retreating for an instant. Izuku grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the ground and hurled it with all his strength. The metal struck the sludge villain's other bulging eye. The creature roared in pain, its grip around Bakugo loosening even more. Izuku didn't hesitate, lunging forward and Bakugo's arm. He started pulling with all his strength. No, you don't. The sludge villain tightened again, but Izuku grit his teeth, refusing to let go. I won't let you die, he shouted, the voice cracking with the sheer force of his emotion. Bakugo's eyes were already flickering in and out of consciousness when he heard the familiar shrill shriek of someone he just wanted to slam on his desk. Which was probably why the sight of Deku, crying and snot filled with a death grip on a metal pipe, came as quite a surprise. Why are you here? Bakugo said weakly, exhaustion already setting in his voice. Deku could only smile at 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨, almost delirious because of the pain. Because you looked like you needed help. Bakugo coughed weakly, his eyes flickering with shock and disbelief as he saw the new look on puny Deku's face. He saw something. This wasn't the kid he would just kick for being so annoyingly optimistic. Not the classmate he would randomly greet with an explosion whenever he felt annoyed. Not the former friend he abandoned because he was incapable of surviving in a world where the strong live. He gazed into Deku's emerald eyes and saw none of the weakness that had irritated him to no end. No, he saw something else. Determination. Why do you have a... Bakugo already slipped into unconsciousness before he could even finish what he said, and the maniacal laughing of the villain behind them didn't give Deku any opening to respond. There was no time for words. The sludge villain roared, rearing back, ready to crush them both. Prepare to die. Izuku looked behind him as a lurking shadow had revealed a sludge villain extending its size, with tentacles resembling arms propping up from his sides before turning into gigantic fists. The sludge villain raised them before slamming as hard as he could, hell-bent on squishing the two teenagers to a pulp. The pain in Izuku's head reduced itself to a shrill, high-pitched wailing. It's over. Izuku resigned himself. He let out a weak smile. At least I tried. Izuku surrendered to his fate. He felt the rush of the wind that had come with the sludge villain's attack, and he braced himself for impact. Mom, Deku said to himself, I'm sorry. Izuku closed his eyes and waited for nothingness. All that came was the impact of strong wind. Too strong, in fact, as he felt his body being ricocheted away by the impact. And then, the ringing in his head was replaced by an all-too-familiar scream. Detroit Smash. Izuku barely had time to catch his breath before the impact had sent him and Bakugo rolling away from where they stood. The all-too-familiar voice boomed across the street and into the skies, grounding everything to a screeching fault save for the whooshing of the wind and the alarm horns of police vehicles on the scene. The youngster felt the strong winds about to throw him off had it not been for the hand that clutched him and Bakugo by their collars. They were propped to the side by the same arms that now went to their savior's waist in all-too-familiar pose. Right there, in front of him, stood a man with a white shirt that barely contained his musculature. Perfectly slicked back blonde hair topped the figure, two spikes protruding upwards rather optimistically. On the man's face was an all-too-familiar smile that beamed light in the darkness. He took a deep breath. It's fine. The murmurs finally stopped as all heads turned towards the silhouette who had now appeared before them. But, because I am here. The chaos of panic was replaced by the chaos of cheers. There he was in front of them, All Might, the symbol of peace. In the eyes of the crowd, he came in just the nick of time, saving the boy who had rushed in to save his fellow youngster from the clutches of an evil villain. The roaring of applause had filled the air that made even the sludge villain appear small. The pro-heroes began rushing towards the scene, evidently rushing towards All Might. The world's #1 pro-hero looked at them in acknowledgement and then nudged towards the unconscious Bakugo. It didn't take seconds for paramedics to appear and carry the teenager to safety. They turned towards Izuku, but All Might dismissed them with a wave. The hero then turned his head towards the sludge villain, or at least what's left of him. The sludge villain now wasn't as large as he had appeared then, as bits and pieces of himself had lain scattered on the road. What's left of him started to wiggle, as though trying to get their bearings in order. It didn't take too long for Izuku to understand what had happened. All Might struck sludge villain with a Detroit smash powerful enough to send him flying backwards, like blowing water off a table. He was that strong. No, Izuku told himself. The pain in his head slowly resurfaced, as though punishing him for that thought. No, it didn't work that way. The Detroit smash would have just made a dent, and sludge villain would ricochet back into normal just as fast. All Might needed a force strong enough to get the sludge villain off balance, to separate his body far enough that they could be contained before he could even reform. Izuku's eyes widened in realization. The wind. I scattered the parts there. All Might said loudly, both as a request and a command. It didn't take long for 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐴 to see the wiggling masses of green slime all over the area. He responded by pointing his hands towards them, with branches and vines immediately sprouting from his arms and rushing to the location. Where there was slime, there came wood that propped them up like a spatula. The wood then closed upon itself, becoming wooden boxes that fell on the ground. The other pro-heroes soon arrived with the same container bottles All Might had carried with him a few hours ago. It seems the police already had them on hand, they were just waiting for the right pro-hero to arrive. Izuku sighed in relief. What a genius All Might was. People think he's just strong, but he used that same strength to generate wind powerful enough to separate Bakugo from the sludge villain, and to separate sludge villain into pieces. It's as though All Might knew the further the parts scattered, the longer it would take for them to reform. What an amazing analysis. Deku needed minutes to understand the sludge villain's power set, but never came up with a solution. All Might had the situation solved before he even struck a hit. So this is how a pro hero thinks. Young man, that is remarkable. Izuku's train of thought derailed at the all-too-familiar sound beside him. He looked up and met the gaze of the very idol he had talked to a while ago. Not 𝗧𝗓𝗠𝗫𝐽𝐻, but the beaming blue eyes of All Might. I must apologize, he whispered. I've told you pro heroes need to be ready to risk their lives, and yet I was afraid to go beyond because of some medical advice. All Might stood tall and proud, his figure recognizably admirable even without his signature blue and red costume. He looked at the pro heroes before him, gathering the sludge villain as he squirmed profanities at the heroes who had just caught him. You've done what no pro hero couldn't today, All Might said. You rushed in to save the hostage even if you don't know how to fight. And here I was saying you can't be a pro hero. He looked at the youngster. I have to practice what I preach. Izuku looked back at All Might, surprised to see he was already staring. Plus ultra, right? They weren't green, was the only thing All Might could think of. When his gaze met that of the adoring Izuku, he saw not the leaf green of innocence but the red of rage. Fixed on the top of his eye was a black comma, like a smudge of ink with no intention of getting out. The heat emanating from the teenager was evident, but only from this close. From afar, no one would even notice his temperature was through the roof. Whatever this kid had done just now couldn't be done by the Izuku who had talked to him a while ago. 𝗧𝗓𝗠𝗫𝐽𝐻 saw everything, even before he decided to intervene. Izuku somehow knew that the sludge villain was capable of absorbing quirks from his victims and that he couldn't control the victim's quirk that fast. Since the inexperience caused explosions everywhere, Izuku must have figured he could use the smoke to mask an attack. True enough, the distractions angered the sludge villain, who fired even more explosions. When the explosions happened too close to the sludge villain, the criminal would recoil and have to let go of the hostage even for a second. That was the opening Izuku waited for. All of that thinking in a short span of time. The passive kid who met him would never have thought of all of this. Can someone like me without a quirk become a pro hero like you? 𝗧𝗓𝗠𝗫𝐽𝐻 gazed upon the black comma that fixed itself in place, floating on Izuku's red eyes like a drop of ink on BLD. Did his eyes do this? Is he really a quirkless? Right. All Might zoned back into reality when he realized Izuku awaited his response. He didn't realize his eyes were still fixated on the boys. 𝗧𝗓𝗠𝗫𝐽𝐻 blinked. They were green now. 𝗧𝗓𝗠𝗫𝐽𝐻, as All Might, mulled over what the boy had said for a few seconds. In truth, he was still trying to make sense of what he had just seen. In the end, he simply crossed his arms and gazed on the pro heroes at a distance, now darkened silhouettes by the orange glow of the sun that had just begun its retreat. Plus ultra. Izuku Midoriya spent the afternoon walking the way he had usually done, head down, shoulders on guard, arms close to the chest, and hands clutching both straps of his knapsack as hard as he could. Spend enough days meeting the business end of Katsuki Bakugo's explosions at the slightest hint of defiance, and one would think to just keep a low profile. Around this time of day, Izuku should have already recalled today's assignments, worrying about laundry in the evenings if he had the unfortunate encounter with said business end, which happened a lot, and maybe grabbed the occasional sandwich from the konbini. Of course, today's version of events was something Izuku hadn't necessarily expected to change his routine. He tucked his knapsack with his hands and savored the memory. He was in high school, and inside his bag was the very hero journal he got All Might to sign. That All Might, the world's #1 pro hero. The thought lingered in Izuku more than he could have imagined. He shuddered a bit because it was not the only thing that happened that day. The events of the past hour just rushed into his head. He was a high schooler, and yet he dashed straight into a crime scene, stared the face of death, and struggled in futility as he attempted to save his very bully from the clutches of a villain who would have certainly killed the both of them without a second thought. No wonder the pro heroes at the scene gave quite the stern lecture. Had it not been for All Might arriving at the nick of time, both Kamui Woods and Death Arms would have presented him to his mother in a body bag. Come on, don't give the kid a hard time. Izuku recalled All Might telling the two just as they ended their speech about leaving everything to the pro heroes. Even as he recalled it, Izuku almost scoffed at the thought. Had I not rushed in, Bakugo would be dead anyway. Izuku simply smiled at the recollection. All Might actually stood up for him. "We heroes should practice what we preach," he told the two back then. "I told this youngster a while ago that we pro-heroes spend every day knowing we'd risk our lives, and yet this one dash," he patted Izuku, which made the youngster jolt up in surprise, "was just a student when he tried saving this young lad here. We should cut him some slack. That's not what we teach at you." All Might. Izuku remembered Death Arms telling the world's #1 pro-hero. Even hero program students are taught to assess the situation and call for backup when necessary. Not everyone can be like you. The thought lingered even further. The embarrassment started to send shivers all over his body. That wasn't the only thing that happened today. All this, encountering the sludge villain, All Might saving him, All Might signing his childhood journal, seeing the sludge villain again but this time holding Bakugo hostage, Izuku abandoning all reason as he rushed in to try and save his bully, All Might saving him again, and pro-heroes lecturing him for being careless, in 3 hours. No wonder he thought going to high school still felt surreal. And with Izuku's idea of a dream school in the picture, he remembered that surreal might be a depressing understatement. A university. You didn't have to emphasize every syllable. This little punk really wants to go to a university. Katsuki's voice boomed across the room and past the roaring laughter of their classmates. Even their teacher chuckled at the thought. Aldra Junior High was no elite school to nurture surefire passers to Japan's top universities, but Izuku could go to a prestigious prep school and still not make the cut. Now, their professor started, closing his marker and placing it in his bag, not minding the laughter that kept going as he spoke. "We shouldn't blame Izuku for dreaming. I suppose anyone can dream of going to university." Izuku blushed at this point. He kept his hand raised just as much as he kept his body tucked close to his chair. He flinched a bit when he heard Bakugo's reaction, knowing how the youngster would feel hearing such a ridiculous proposition. Still, the teacher did ask who applied where. And while Izuku could have kept quiet, any pro-hero who graduated from UA would have been proud of their choice. This was the only quiet word that had come from Bakugo before the loud cracking of explosions and the assorted clanging of school desks filled the room. The professor could only sigh as Bakugo had practically propelled himself off his desk with his explosion quirk without so much as a care in the world, his feet dangling in the air as he hit one chuckling classmate after the next. It didn't matter if Bakugo's trajectory hit some books or put desks in disarray. Some began to mind their own business. Others gazed at the angry teen in the same way they were looking at an everyday occurrence. Whenever Bakugo releases his explosion quirk, he owned the classroom. It didn't matter if even the principal was there. Everyone looked at Bakugo's destination, an act of unison amid the chaos of scattered paperwork and desks just minutes before school ended for the day. Eyes were set on Izuku's unsuspecting green, and the teen let out a hearty chuckle as though this hasn't been happening for the past 5 years. It didn't take a moment for Bakugo's face to be right in front of Izuku's. As if on cue, Izuku had the luxury of smelling Bakugo's breath at barely a finger's distance. Izuku could hear the subtle popping around Bakugo's hands that were now conveniently on both sides of his face. "You are going to UA," Bakugo said, practically screamed, at his face. The mockery was implied. The sweat and spit practically enhanced the flavor. Izuku couldn't even catch his breath at this distance, especially with Bakugo laughing directly at his face. "Ha! Poor little Deku wants go to you. You okay there, kiddo?" Izuku almost jumped. The sound of another voice when Bakugo's permeated his brain was a jolt back to reality he didn't expect. The encounter at school happened a couple of days ago, but Bakugo's voice echoed in him like a broken record. That wasn't the part that surprised him, though. What made him jump was the fact that he was too deep in his thoughts that he forgot All Might, the world's #1 pro-hero, walked beside him. Except, All Might shouldn't be just a foot or two taller than Izuku. The thin and frail man who walked with him was Toshinori Yagi, the man formerly known as All Might. Izuku distinctly remembered their conversation on the rooftop mere hours before their fated encounter with the sludge villain. According to Toshinori, he was only permitted a 3-hour shift as the world's #1 pro-hero before the physical toll would start getting the better of him. A rather peculiar tidbit for sure, but Izuku knew not to pry when he saw his childhood idol pluck one blood-filled tissue SRP and replaced it with another. If Izuku went back in time to tell his snot-filled, crying younger self that he would eventually walk side by side with All Might, he wouldn't believe it for a second. And if a younger Bakugo caught wind of this news, he would have probably started bullying Izuku a few years too early. Yet he walked the way home beside All Might's real identity, of all things. What surprised Izuku even more was that a thin Toshinori that gasped for breath as he chased after him as soon as he left the crime scene. Kamui Woods and Death Arms authorized him to leave as soon as he handed his version of events. Izuku wanted to include the ineptitude of pro-heroes as part of the reason why he sprang to action in the first place, but All Might's presence made him think otherwise. When Izuku asked why Toshinori followed him, the latter said he just wanted to walk with him before he went home. Izuku simply nodded, before eventually realizing, Izuku, this crybaby that got bullied at school all the time, met All Might, perhaps the most remarkable creation of 𝐻𝐼. As the two walked together, Izuku distinctly remembered what Death Arms told the symbol of peace. Not everyone can be like you. That was funny, Izuku thought as he gazed at Toshinori beside him. We all wanted to be like All Might. When the younger versions of Izuku and Katsuki pledged to go to 𝐻𝐼. When they'd finally grow up, it all came with the imagination of getting a physique as strong as All Might's and the power to defeat all the bad guys. And now that Izuku had a chance to look at 𝐻𝐼's material, not just the brochure and the website, but even the climactic final fights of the yearly 𝐻𝐼 Sports Festival, he knew the school could offer the best education for anyone whose dreams ever involved becoming a pro hero. 𝐻𝐼 University was the cream of the CRP among pro-hero training academies. When quirks became more widespread and superheroes became the norm, the world soon realized they needed educational institutions where young quirk users with the most potential to be heroes were trained while getting their secondary education. That way, they can go straight to doing superheroics under hero agencies, work government positions, or even become independent pro-heroes as soon as they graduate. And when All Might climbed to superhero stardom, so too did 𝐻𝐼 University's value skyrocket. Although Izuku had no way to explain it from a business perspective, he knew All Might's presence was enough to get 𝐻𝐼 government sponsorships and all the branding deals to support whatever spending they needed probably. Izuku would have dabbled deep into the economics of superheroics of their time, but he often lost himself in the fantasies of people cheering for him as he saved lives, the same way All Might had done. The same way All Might just saved him today. Izuku recalled his idol asking him a question. He could only nod in response. Why, yeah, he told his idol. Izuku thought Toshinori Yagi probably wondered why this was their only exchange for the past half hour. In truth, Toshinori Yagi probably had no idea what kind of privilege he's given Izuku. Any bystander who knew what was happening would have likely scolded Izuku for not asking all the details about All Might's adventures. Izuku could only imagine the things he could get to ask. How does being number one feel? Does Endeavor have a shot at actually beating you? Who's gonna be the next All Might? Anyone who knew All Might, and that's the whole world, would probably have traded their lives with Izuku if that meant being next to the world greatest like Izuku currently was. Izuku almost sighed at the thought. Would I wish that to another person? Would I really want someone to bear years of hearing Bakugo call them Deku? Bakugo spat the nickname, the name he picked for Izuku, with disgust. Fool. Useless. Good for nothing. Izuku let out the quietest chuckle that he could. You don't have to stress the word every time you say it. He flinched at the sight of Bakugo's eyes as they looked straight at him, especially now that they were barely inches apart. Bakugo responded with a snort. What are you gonna do at 𝐻𝐼? Sharpen their pencils. The class laughed at the chide. Izuku only let out another chuckle. Bakugo's jokes could use some work, for sure. I asked you a question, he said amid the laughter of their fellow classmates. This was the banter between Izuku and Bakugo every day. Whenever Izuku caught a professor's attention, be it a correct answer, a decent presentation, or anything in between, it's as though Bakugo made it his personal mission to put a foot down and give Izuku an NTMT exchange with the floor. Izuku initially wondered why Bakugo seemed so hell-bent on ruining his life until it became second nature. When Izuku went to school, he anticipated Bakugo becoming angry at something he'd do. Izuku would constantly flinch the first few years this had happened. Countless ruined lunches, dirted uniforms, vandalized lockers, and beatdowns by the gate later, and Izuku had just accepted this as part of his daily life. He never bothered telling his mother this. She would just worry. He also didn't tell her he actually put in an application to you. She'd probably think it was a joke. And as Izuku predicted, even his classmates thought he was doing this as a GG. The way Bakugo's eyes met Izuku's told him he wasn't joking. I said. Bakugo slammed an open fist on Izuku's table, the crackling expanding into a much louder boom that had begun catching everyone's attention. By the time the smoke cleared, even those who had just begun packing their bags were tuned in on the two. Izuku could see Bakugo's red eyes flash amid the curtain of what smoke remained, his teeth grit a fatal shine in a growing darkness of fear that had begun filling Izuku. Katsuki's free hand grabbed Izuku by the collar and lifted him up his chair. The youngster lost grip of his pencil and notebook, and both clattered on his desk. Izuku had already felt weak with the constant ridicule, but when he noticed his thin body was lifted by Bakugo with ease, it added a different level of humiliation within him. Bakugo continued. I asked you a question. You walk this way home, huh? Toshinori asked, again after a few minutes. Izuku nodded weakly. Why, yeah, he simply said. Izuku used to answer a question on demand, never the one to start a conversation. Anytime he tried to talk, Bakugo answered with a fist or a foot. It's probably why he immediately flinched when he saw All Might raise an arm. To stretch, not to hit him. Toshinori noticed this. It didn't take for him to realize. Anyone who's experienced this will know. The stunned silence, being conditioned to only answer when talked to, often done by someone else. Toshinori recognized the slight tinge of torment that made Izuku's green eyes lose their shimmer. People probably told you never to talk until asked, huh? Izuku blinked, widening his eyes in surprise. The question caught him off guard. What? I know that reaction, Toshinori said, almost quietly. He smiled a weak smile. You don't have to do that with me, kiddo. You can talk freely. For some reason, Izuku couldn't help but just attempt to smile. Water wanted to form around his eyes, but his body resisted on instinct. He touched his stomach unconsciously like he would meet a fist if he let his guard down. Toshinori looked at Izuku, and then at the horizon. He munched on his sandwich. Izuku tried to interpret this. Maybe he tried to make him feel comfortable. Perhaps he was just hungry. He continued. At you. That teach students that humans evolved as social creatures. He paused like he picked the words he had to say. We had to spend thousands of years learning that we can't live alone because the outside world is so dangerous. Toshinori took another bite. He continued as he munched his food. We learned that, by living with each other, we can feel safe because we're in the presence of other people. We can be comfortable to grow and be ourselves. We became the society we know today because of that. Toshinori munched some more before he continued. As pro-heroes, we teach students to always appeal to everyone's good side. Not to coddle them, but to make sure they feel safe, validated, and most importantly, reassured that evil won't harm them. Izuku just nodded. Where was he getting at? Toshinori sensed Izuku was waiting for a point, so he continued. We normally have no reason not to open up because we're hardwired to be curious and explore the world around us, Toshinori said. Which means if your body is all curled up like a ball and you get worked up with what I said, something dash, he saw Izuku look on the ground. Or someone dash, he saw Izuku flinch, like he recognized something out of that language. Is making us want to protect ourselves. It's a defense mechanism. Something curled inside Izuku's stomach. The slightest tinge circled his head like he was anticipating blame. He knew just with the way I acted. Was I too obvious? It's as though Toshinori noticed what he thought because his following statement was, Don't take this the wrong way, he said, raising a free hand as the other held the few bites remaining in his sandwich. I didn't mean to imply that someone was hurting you or something. Izuku didn't respond. Toshinori's voice dropped down to a hush. But someone was, yeah. Izuku didn't know why he balled his fists. He only stopped when he realized his sandwich was about to pop out of its wrapping. He just nodded. Toshinori almost stopped on his tracks. Do you want me to call someone? Izuku shook his head. High school is about to end, almost a year is left. There's no point. Toshinori fell silent. He took the last bite of his sandwich. He was trying to think of what to tell the youngster beside him. What should he say? What would he want someone to tell him back then? Do you want to talk about it? Toshinori knew Izuku would shake his head, but he also knew the least he could offer was an ear. This was probably why he was surprised Izuku didn't shake his head. He noticed Izuku cleared his throat, opened his mouth, and then closed it again, like he hesitated at the last second. Toshinori understood that too. What can you even say about it? Izuku asked quietly, almost in a whisper. He had also eaten the rest of his sandwich. He folded the wrapping and put it in his pocket before he wiped the breadcrumbs on his uniform. You're the world's #1 pro hero. You stop crimes, not things like this. I am not All Might now, though, Toshinori said with a smile. So don't worry. You can tell me anything, young Midoriya. What's on your mind? I asked you a question, Deku. The repetition stung, and the insistence a blatant insult. Izuku noticed water forming around his eyes but resisted the tears. Study to become a hero? Oh, obviously, Izuku said, swallowing between words to retract the water in his eyes. He's not about to start crying again now. Bakugo stared at him for a moment, as though trying to comprehend if the words that had come from his mouth were serious or not. It's only when Izuku didn't continue that he understood the youngster was, indeed, intent on getting into you. Hi. You, Bakugo said, eyeing Izuku from head to whatever his face could see at this distance. He practically spat. You really applied. Izuku let out a weak nod. Truth be told, Izuku had no clue why Bakugo would make this a big deal. There's a huge chance he'd fail. Even Izuku knew this at the back of his head. But if applications were free and there were no real repercussions to them, why not apply? Truth be told, Izuku considered this the best gift he'd given himself for his 18th birthday, pursue his dream, for once. He should ignore if people said no. He's heard that all his life. At this point, what's the worst that could happen? The wall at the end of the classroom meeting Izuku's back was the worst thing that could happen. Izuku didn't realize Bakugo could have such strength. Even their other classmates were surprised. The professor noticed the escalation. Oi, he yelled as he walked towards them, with a few students making way as the rest gathered around the commotion. The professor would have already asked Izuku how he was had Bakugo not pointed an open palm in front of his face. When Bakugo turned his head towards the professor, to describe his glare as fierce is an understatement. Their teacher felt a chill run down his spine and froze where he stood. He gazed worryingly at Izuku, who struggled to stand, and especially more so when Bakugo turned and kicked him on the stomach. At this point, heads peered from the small glass panel on their locked door. The noise evidently caught the attention of the other classes. Bakugo paid no mind. You're a Quirkless. Bakugo screamed, hitting Izuku again with his foot. Toshinori felt his heart crushed by what he'd just heard. He at first wondered if Izuku had already crossed his own line when he talked about his experience with Bakugo. Normally, someone would not entrust anyone else with such a heavy struggle. And yet Izuku seemed not to have a hard time sharing it with him. When Toshinori looked at Izuku's sad but somehow lively eyes, he realized All Might was probably Izuku's only bastion of peace when he got home after a rough day. That invitation of his earlier, of urging Izuku to share, was probably the first time someone has ever done that to the kid. Trauma dumping was the term kids use these days, and this was something Toshinori and his fellow teachers were taught at school. And from what he saw in Izuku's eyes, the trauma ran deep. Toshinori could only nod slowly. He understood. He knew. He could only imagine the kind of pain Izuku has experienced. No, it's because he can imagine how lived, that the weight felt all too real. He was moved back into the past, in even more chaotic times when one's quirk dictated one's social status. The very times he swore to change by becoming a hero, even with nothing to show for. 𝗏𝗏𝐼's response to people looking down on him was to strive to become even better, to never let his lacking define himself. He couldn't exactly preach this to a teenager who just told him he spent the good 5 years of his life being kicked every day for the tiniest of slights, by a person he considered his friend, no less. All because he was quirkless. It was that term again, even as they talked on the rooftop at lunch. Quirkless. He said, "I can't go to you. Hi, because I'm a quirkless," he remembered the kid say back then. But 𝗏𝗏𝐼 also remembered the way the teenager's green eyes sucked to red when he rushed to save his bully from the sludge villain. Quirkless. 𝗏𝗏𝐼 pondered as he remembered how the term was also used to define him before he became All Might. And yet, 𝗏𝗏𝐼 repeated the word in his mind, specifically in the way Izuku said it. And he replayed the events that led to their walk now. Izuku rushed to help 𝗏𝗏𝐽 with red eyes, not the green he saw today. That's a quirk, right? 𝗏𝗏𝐼 realized there's a slight chance Izuku might be oblivious to his quirk, but couldn't find an opening to ask. At that time, 𝗏𝗏𝐼 wasn't so sure this would affect his assessment of the youth. Would being truly quirkless matter after he received the mantle? Would already having a quirk erase the meaning of what the mantle represented? Izuku groaned lightly, placing a hand on his stomach. He resumed his story. The youngster groaned in pain as his foot made contact with his torso. This was routine to them, but Izuku couldn't fathom the animosity that had arisen in Bakugo this time around. He was just applying to you. Hi, what's the big deal? Izuku looked down as he mustered his strength to get up. Bakugo obliged. He grabbed him by the hair and lifted him before he slammed him against the wall. What's gotten in your head, Deku? Bakugo asked. Whether rhetorically or not, Izuku couldn't identify with the pain. You're expecting me to believe there is some possibility I will see myself in the same high school as you. A quirkless. Dream on, loser. Izuku couldn't exactly reply with a counterargument. Bakugo had a point. Most pro heroes in Japan were UA alumni, including his, and technically Bakugo's, idol, All Might. And for a doting fan like Izuku, what better way to honor his idol than to go to the actual university where he went? If it's for the chance to apply to you. Izuku was more than willing to endure a few more years' worth of Bakugo insults. Izuku knew Bakugo was fully intent on going to you. This was practically their dream as children, at least, until Bakugo discovered Izuku didn't actually have a quirk. While Bakugo distanced himself from an outcast like Izuku, the latter thought the former wouldn't seriously think Izuku would give up on their dreams so easily. Izuku knew he would likely bomb the application. He might pass the test but never the practicals. Everyone had to have a quirk to participate effectively. Izuku wasn't stupid. He knew there's eventually going to be a wall he was never going to cross. Truth be told, Izuku prepared himself to get a rejection letter as soon as he submitted his application. Years of being called Deku would make someone always anticipate for the worst. Izuku just applied for the hell of it. So Izuku didn't expect Bakugo's words to sting. It pierced something in his core. I cannot dream. Bakugo backed off. You better drop that application, Midoriya, he said as he fixed his clothes. It was the first time in a while Izuku had heard him use his last name. There are a million reasons they can reject me, Izuku said as he smiled weakly. Applying there is like asking for an instant rejection, he just added. Bakugo's eyebrows met. And I am saying drop it. Jump off a building while you're at it. The classroom remained silent, save for a few who chuckled. The attempt died as soon as no one else followed through. No one could determine whether Bakugo was serious or not this time around. This was the first time he was extra violent toward Izuku. And by the way Izuku made momentary glances towards his classmates, it seemed none of them had any idea why Bakugo got so riled up at the mere idea of Izuku going to the prestigious pro-hero training school. In the end, Izuku chuckled a bit of light laughter. Come on, 𝗏𝗏𝐽, that seems a bit intense. Wrong move. It was probably the 𝗏𝗏𝐽 that ticked him off. With every Deku that came from Bakugo's mouth equaled a 𝗏𝗏𝐽 from Izuku's. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 was an even older nickname that existed even before Bakugo christened Izuku with a reminder of his inadequacies. Today, Izuku just spat 𝗏𝗏𝐽 as a friendly retort, although a part within him also thought, I ought to remind everyone we used to be friends before you reduced me to a nickname. Bakugo had Izuku by his collars again before the latter got too intense. Either Bakugo got the hint or got annoyed. Izuku even tried dignifying his threat with a response. You seem to be defiant today, Deku, Bakugo said, and again he emphasized the words. For some reason he grinned, as though he finally let loose. Now why is that? Did applying to you get you a spine? What are you so proud of? You really think All Might would pay attention to you? Izuku felt Bakugo's loosened grip as the blonde teenager had actually backed off. The former was actually stunned in sheer surprise. That is, until Bakugo caught wind of something on Izuku's desk. It glared with the sunlight, as though begging to be noticed. Izuku felt weight crushing down as soon as Bakugo had a notebook in his hand. It was his hero journal. Oh God, you actually kept this? Bakugo asked, both rhetorically and hysterically. He looked at the crowd before him and he raised the notebook like it was some sort of trophy. This here, Bakugo said. He raised his hand higher as Izuku desperately tried to reach it, is Deku's precious hero journal. A hero journal? Toshinori asked. He repeated what Izuku had just said. What's a hero journal? Toshinori noticed Izuku had smiled. A real one with the way his eyes glowed. The youngster quickly swung the knapsack to the front of his body. Never mind that his shoulder and arm screamed in pain as he had done so. Toshinori noticed the way Izuku's eyes beamed after he asked the question, the way he rummaged through his things before he showed him the same rugged notebook he signed. This one, Izuku said with evident pride. He turned a page and showed his signature. The one with your autograph. Toshinori remembered. When he saved Izuku from the sludge villain that morning, this was the first thing Izuku showed when he asked if the youngster had anything he wanted signed. It was standard superhero routine when encountering a fan, and All Might always delighted in seeing the populace so at peace whenever he was around. He was surprised that Izuku called this a hero journal. Or perhaps he wasn't. The way Izuku flipped through the pages and showed him everything, the crude drawings, the notes, some random scribblings, made him seem like a child so eager to show something to his parents. Somehow, Toshinori wondered if Izuku had showed this to anyone else. The way the notebook was constructed made him feel this was the only place Izuku had felt free with all the things happening in his life at the time. When Izuku handed Toshinori the hero journal, the world's #1 pro hero didn't even have to read through everything intently to understand what the notebook meant for the youngster. A different pang constricted in his chest, a suffocating feeling overwhelmed his senses. The Izuku who filled the pages of this notebook was vastly different from the Izuku he's walking with right now. Every spread was dedicated to a pro hero. The lack of real identities and crude drawings aside, Izuku nailed almost every detail the public would have seen or heard. He gave some quirks their own names, some of which scribbled out as their registered quirk names were written beside them, probably after he researched them or encountered them from somewhere more official. There were dates beside some anecdotes, small notes about how pro heroes used them, and some questions on whether certain quirks could be used in certain ways. For a guy who's just turned 18, this single hero journal was possibly the most practical source of handwritten pro hero information Toshinori has ever seen. Truth be told, Toshinori had already thought of Izuku as someone he could trust, the same way with how Nana trusted him. To see how this youngster had paid so close attention to superheroes seemed like plus points to his mental resume. Toshinori was still looking at the notebook while they walked. This is impressive, he said. You have a website of it or something? Izuku was caught off guard. He shook his head, his hands following. Oh no, he said, followed by a weak laughter. This is more of my private journal. Just stuff I liked about pro heroes. My notebook doesn't have much. The internet is filled with more theories and stuff. I'll leave it to the professionals. It's just a childish keepsake. A childish keepsake he's kept in his bag all the time, Toshinori thought. He didn't show it in his face, but in his thoughts he smiled. And besides, no one will believe a quirkless like me, Izuku continued just as fast. That word again. Toshinori nodded slowly, more for acknowledgement than approval. He stopped at a particular page. All Might, it read. Quirk, unknown. The world's #1 pro hero. He's super strong, super fast and super tough. The writing looked much older than the rest of Izuku's notes. The spelling mistakes weren't erased. The page dedicated to All Might was the center sprawl, and the drawing included here was what appeared, at least, after Toshinori rotated the notebook a couple of times, his outfit during the Golden Age. There were other stick outfits drawn beside it too, and a wave of nostalgia just hit him. All Might's page was probably the first one, he thought. The one he drew first as a kid. And then the realization sunk. This was probably the only reason Izuku was able to move forward all these years. He remembered how the youngster said 𝐻𝐿 was an aspiration he knew he'd never reach because he was content with what he was able to write in this hero journal. Whatever he's written here were probably during the times the world told him he was useless for seemingly being quirkless. He looked at Izuku. This boy probably didn't even care. As long as he had that notebook, he was safe. He takes a step forward knowing he can go into that hero journal anytime and spend as much time as he wanted to with his favorite heroes. The smile showed it all. Izuku giggled like a kid as if he hadn't been in a life-threatening situation mere hours before. His torso contorted slightly when he did, and while he tried to laugh harder to mask the pain, Toshinori saw it. "Keep this safe, yeah," he just said, handing the notebook back to Izuku. The kid slowly took the notebook off the pro hero's hands, taking care to touch the whole parts while not hitting the blackened edges. He wanted to ask why Izuku chose a half-burnt notebook but dismissed it as probably a stylistic choice. "I'd probably ask for that when I retire to read and reminisce," he continued with a smile. Toshinori didn't know why he said that. Or perhaps he already did. Izuku was practically grinning. "Really? Toshinori looked at Izuku, his eyes glowing with the brightest emerald sheen he's ever seen. Where Toshinori decided never to let the world define him for what he lacked, Izuku resigned to not caring. Toshinori understood. It's difficult to fight a world that keeps on saying no, and for Izuku, between just wanting a normal life and a doting mother, fighting was something he probably couldn't afford. He wouldn't blame Izuku for wanting a day to breathe without constantly watching his back. These innocent eyes will forget every pain for even a second of bliss. Toshinori remembered the pair of crimson he's seen on that same face just an hour ago. The sight burned into his eyes. But those raging eyes will remember. Bakugo remembered. Izuku couldn't keep his head straight. All he wanted was to get the journal back, but Bakugo's elbow was on the way. He groaned in pain and couldn't raise his arm as high as he wanted. Sweat started to pour from his forehead. Izuku knew the direction where this was going. Bakugo gave Izuku's shin a kick so the youngster would kneel down. This was the opening he needed to actually open it, scanning its pages in front of the class. "Oh man, this actually had his sketches when he was a twerp," Bakugo chided, his laughter almost hysteria at this point. None of their classmates knew if it was their cue to laugh with him. They just left Bakugo alone as he scanned Izuku's hero journal. Izuku's eyes pained at the sight. Bakugo held his most precious possession. No, it wasn't why it was painful. He remembered. Bakugo was one of the only people Izuku showed his hero journal to. This was the mark of Izuku's shame, the one thing he couldn't have but obsessed about. He didn't have quirks, but he recorded the quirks of everyone he admired. All Might, pro heroes, almost everyone he encountered that held some form of significance. Anytime they used their quirk in a new way, it goes straight to Izuku's hero journal. Izuku knew his hero journal from cover to cover. He knew exactly where every drawing was, which page had whose quirk, and how many pages were still blank. So when Bakugo paused reading, Izuku knew he had just reached the page named 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. And when Bakugo glared back at him, the hand holding the hero journal practically balled into a fist and starting to crumple the pages, Izuku knew he had crossed the line. "You recorded me?" Bakugo asked, almost nonchalantly. "You actually had the nerve to write about my quirk?" Izuku mustered the courage to stand up. He had to. "Please," was the only thing he could get out of his mouth. The pain in his leg put him on his knees. He had clung both hands on Bakugo's breaths. He pleaded. "You think you know my quirk so much, huh?" Bakugo asked as he tilted his head to the side as though a screw had just went loose. He moved the hero journal in front of Izuku, pages still facing him. "Explosion," Bakugo read. His sweat can make explosions he releases when he opens his palms. He can use this to propel himself around the battlefield. When he was done, 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝑒's voice went from mockery to somewhat amusement. "I'm impressed," 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻𝑒 said, nodding as though he's just read something insightful. "You're not as stupid as you look." Izuku stood there. He didn't exactly know how to react. He simply let out a weak smile. Maybe 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe would just hand the hero journal back if he's happy. Except, the hand that held the journal erupted in a crackling that released the harshest popping sounds Izuku had heard in his life. Smoke burst from his hand, evidently from the impact of his explosion quirk. Izuku's eyes widened at the sight his hero journal engulfed in smoke. 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe's smile went from ear to ear. "You didn't know I could activate my quirk that way?" Izuku's mind went blank, and then screamed with the loudest ringing. What normally would have been a migraine skipped straight into despair. Something in him just snapped. 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe bullying him, he can take. This friend, no, former friend, insulting him, he can take. This person somehow spending every day of the past 5 years telling him he was worthless trash, he can take. As long as 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe didn't touch the hero journal, everything was free real estate. This was the pact Izuku made with himself, to bear as long as it took. Except this. Why you dash? Izuku already met the ground before he was able to extend a fist. 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe simply shoved him. It wasn't even a hard push, just a reaction. 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe started laughing the same way he used to laugh every day, but no one followed him. All eyes were on Izuku. Everyone was asking the same question. Did he try to punch 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe? Did he actually fight back? Izuku felt the notebook hit him before it clattered on the ground. He reached for it but let out a yelp when 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe slammed a heel on the top of his palm. Izuku groaned, but desperately tried getting his hand off his classmate's shoe anyway. It took 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe a few good stomps before he let go, and a foot to the chest had pushed Izuku on the ground before he could tend to his reddened hand. "I'll pretend you didn't actually try that," 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe said. Izuku noticed the hint of surprise in his face. Izuku endured the pain and clutched the notebook with both arms. He took a bloodied right hand and scanned what remained of his damaged hero journal. 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe had actually went light on him, only burning a bit of the front and the edges. Most of the pages were intact, save for some with scribbles now covered in the black of burnt paper. Izuku finally started tearing up. He almost destroyed it. 𝐶𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe was aghast. He had just seen the kind of dedication Izuku had poured into this hero journal. It must have taken years to fill it with this many scribblings. And he probably started since they were kids, too. Perhaps the thing that bothered 𝐶𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe the most was that 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe knew how much this meant to Izuku. "It's as though he deliberately wanted to destroy it," he whispered out loud. Izuku nodded as he smiled weakly. "I first wondered why he was so mad I wanted to go to you. But dash," he groaned, touching his stomach that twisted ever so slightly in pain. "I guess at some point you just accept it." 𝐶𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe shook his head. That's wrong. That's unfair." Izuku could only shrug. "What could I do, All Might? It's not like I have a quirk." "That again." Izuku continued, smile as weak as ever. "If you don't have a quirk, you can't dream. The notebook was safe. That's what's most important." Izuku would have breathed relief had his stomach not contorted in pain. A reddened hand held the notebook ever so slightly to his chest. He curled up like a ball on the floor, water now flowing in his eyes. The notebook was safe. It's all that matters. He might not have a quirk, but he can at least dream of his adventures with heroes. At least he had the decency to leave me with a dream. And like a harbinger of nightmares, 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe's silhouette felt as though he's telling Izuku he will always dictate what he is, and especially isn't, allowed to dream. This time, 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe loomed over Izuku like a gigantic wave about to hit the shore. At this vantage point, the ceiling light glared across 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe's back that he practically cast a shadow over Izuku below him. He only said the words this time. Izuku vividly remembered the absence of his comedic cracking, the lack of papers falling, and his peers laughing. Silence had filled the air as though 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe had put the universe on mute to ensure Izuku would remember his words. Izuku gazed upon 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻ewe's red eyes amid the silence. To describe it as filled with bloodlust is an understatement. You set foot in that school and I will kill you. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 wasn't so sure how he should react. Izuku had told that a former friend threatened to kill him matter-of-factly like it was an everyday occurrence. And the insistence on the Quirk thing too. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 figured now was as good a time to ask as any. That was his answer. I guess it's a slap in the face that you tried to save him, then, young Midoriya, 𝗏𝗏𝗡 simply said. He tried to smile, even though the statement caught Izuku off guard. The youngster blushed, giggled, and had an arm hold the back of his head in embarrassment. Hearing no reply, 𝗏𝗏𝗡 continued. And all while you possessed a simple quirk, 𝗏𝗏𝗡 caught Izuku's giggling stop, but his words came out faster than he could react. It's not like you could fight with it conventionally. It took him 2 steps before he realized Izuku stopped on his tracks. He looked back, noticing the youngster's face as though hit with water from a bucket. The shimmer in his eyes was gone, replaced with the blankness of disbelief. Izuku spoke before he could ask, his words filled with stunned coldness. What did you just say? Why your quirk? 𝗏𝗏𝗡 wasn't quite sure why he stammered. In between breaths, he tried figuring out what he had said had changed the boy's mood. I didn't mean to say it was weak or anything. Just unconventionally non-combative. I thought you'd understand with your notes. Izuku's eyebrows were probably contorted the same way his stomach had. I don't have a quirk, he said almost quietly. What are you talking about? That time when you saved Bakugo, 𝗏𝗏𝗡 simply answered. Why you used your quirk, right? To change your eye color. Eye color? Izuku replied, although it felt more like a statement than a question. He wasn't sure for who, to himself, to All Might. Is that a joke? Was his mere follow-up. Familiar ringing found its way around his head. It sounded like a bell but echoed like a thunderclap, like a push that became an earthquake before he could even blink. He was quite sure 𝗏𝗏𝗡 said no, but the ringing masked any semblance of sound in his head. His eyes saw 𝗏𝗏𝗡 move his lips, and for a second even his brain somehow recognized the words that came out of his mouth, but a shooting pain, from the ridiculosity of it all, just gave everything a reddish hue. Why would he joke about something like this? The pieces hit him like shards of glass desperate for him to gather. Each thought stung as he began to put them together, like a knife that cut through flesh. The throbbing ran deeper the more he tried to stop thinking, and only abated whenever he tried to make sense of why his idol would even think he had a quirk. Unless he's in on it. That's when the ringing turned silent. Izuku looked 𝗏𝗏𝗡, no, All Might, dead in the eye. Transposed across his rather long face was Bakugo's own deathly red stare. You really think All Might would notice you? What chill ran down his spine transformed into a warmth that twisted his insides. It's as though he heard the food that he just ate churn from within, and the acid rose to his throat. His chest started beating faster, the redness reaching his face. Izuku muddled over what just happened. He just poured everything to All Might, his idol, who said he could share anything. Everything that's happened for the past 5 years, the recent horrible thing Bakugo had done, the beating he's got, all of it, this person knew, and somehow he joked about him having a quirk. The one thing people insulted him with. Izuku didn't need anyone else to drive the point. He already knew the point. He wasn't so sure where he'd be insulted, that All Might straight up just joked he had a quirk, or the quirk he came up with was related to changing his eye color. Of all the mundane quirks. It didn't matter that the pain was practically squishing his head together. Everything reeked of Bakugo. Of course Bakugo would somehow get the world's #1 pro hero to pull off this prank. The pain shot up his head. It was sudden. Izuku groaned and put a hand on his temple. He knew All Might saw this. The expression in 𝗏𝗏𝗡's face changed. He approached. Hey. Step back. Izuku flailed an arm as he almost fell to the ground had it not been for the feet he had planted together. He shook his head in disbelief. He wanted to laugh, but the headache was too unbearable. Izuku opened his eyes. Tried to, anyway, but the pain made him feel like he wanted to collapse. He held his ground. He needed All Might to hear this. Fine, Izuku said as he waved his arm aimlessly, almost drunkly. You can tell Bakugo I give up. I'll waive my application. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 raised an eyebrow, the confounding in his voice evident. What? Izuku stammered the syllables, the headaches growing more intense. I don't know how we can hire pro heroes to do pranks, but I get it, Izuku just said. This time he crouched on the ground, both hands on his temples, the throbbing just raging at this point. Everything was starting to make sense. He wanted to scream the words to make the pain go away, but he could only slur them. I'll waive my application. Give it up, he said, simplifying as though he couldn't think of the proper ways to say it. He just had to say it. This is not a prank. 𝗧𝗏 said slowly, his eyes drifting to the ground as though in deep thought. Izuku didn't care, he could use the silence. He noticed 𝗧𝗏 looking straight at him, his eyes widening, and then somehow started rummaging through his pockets. Izuku wasn't so sure what he said that left 𝗧𝗏 standing there for a few seconds. Was this not part of their script? The next thing he knew, 𝗧𝗏 took something out of his pocket. A mobile phone. In a few clicks, he showed its screen to Izuku. It was the front camera. And it was his face too red in both embarrassment and anger. His hair was disheveled, his eyes almost wet with tears. Just a typical day where Izuku leaves the house and comes back as poor Deku. You can post my face, Izuku said. He almost slurred his words, waving his hand. Proof of the prank. Something or other. Whatever. 𝗧𝗏 shook his head. No, your eyes. Izuku wanted to lie down on the floor due to the pain, but 𝗧𝗏 held his arm. Look, he whispered, almost pleading. Izuku gazed upon his sorry reflection on the smartphone. He observed himself again. The disheveled hair, the dirt all over his uniform, the wetness of tears in his red eyes. What's there to see? The pain ceased. For a moment, even the ringing in his mind vanished. Red eyes. Izuku blinked 1, 2, then 3 times. He yanked 𝗧𝗏's phone away from him, fiddling with the brightness, and sent it to the maximum. At one point, he got the screen almost inches away from his nose. 𝗧𝗏 started scratching his head. He seemed just as confused as Izuku was. Izuku was even more perplexed. I have red eyes, he asked loudly, not sure if to himself or 𝗧𝗏. Wait, 𝗧𝗏 answered just as quick, you don't know. Izuku flicked a finger to 𝐬𝐶 into video mode. He turned it on before staring at himself. This was no trickery with the light. His green eyes were truly red. It was a deep crimson, with a black comma floating on top at a size as large as his pupil. What the hell? Izuku just whispered. He looked at All Might. But I don't have a quirk. The doctors, they dash, 𝗧𝗏 nodded, almost blankly. He probably recognized what Izuku was talking about. When children up to the age of 8 have yet to demonstrate any quirks, they're taken to a quirk specialist to get checked. They provide an assessment whether a child would have any chance of developing a quirk later as a late bloomer, or none at all. Izuku's diagnosis was the latter. He was quirkless. Izuku stared at his red eyes. The black comma receded into the red, and the crimson washed out into green. They were normal again. Izuku stopped the video. He looked at 𝗧𝗏. All Might's alter ego just nodded. Apparently you're not quirkless. Congratulations. Izuku's eyes widened at the realization. Oh God, what have I done? He looked at 𝗧𝗏. No, All Might. He cupped his mouth. Oh God, was the only thing he said. 𝗧𝗏 could only give out a hearty laugh. Izuku was as red as his. He shook his head. Oh God, I'm so sorry I shouted at you, Izuku started, stammered, struggled to find his bearings. I really thought this was all a PR prank and that it's all right, kid, he told Izuku as he patted him on the shoulder. We all had that reaction when we first got our quirks. Izuku paused at the realization. He put fingers on both his eyelids. The camera wasn't in front of him anymore, but the imagery was too vivid to forget. My eyes turned red. Izuku shook his head. No, more specific. I can turn my eyes red. No, the thing he always wanted to hear. I have a quirk. For the first time in a long time, Izuku felt calm. He smiled. It was the first genuine smile he's given since the doctors reported he was quirkless. The first time in a long time since he smiled without fear of being accused of something, of being hit, of being ridiculed. He wasn't the powerless Deku anymore. For the first time, he belonged. But why now? The late awakening was the only thing Izuku could say. How do I even activate it? 𝗏𝗏𝗏 shrugged. But, dunno. Izuku almost fell to the ground, like a weight had fallen on his head. Surely you have a better answer than that. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 chuckled. Come on, you're taking it too seriously. You should celebrate, he said. You have a quirk. Your dream. Izuku paused. That's right. That was my dream. Izuku raised his eyebrows. That wasn't the dream. Izuku didn't know what had gone on in his head. He put both palms beside his face and slapped his cheeks, sensing if he was dreaming. Realizing this was all real, he turned to face All Might. I have a quirk, he told him. He told his idol, the world's #1 pro hero. He told him almost declaratively, like an announcement. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 couldn't help but nod with what seemed to be pride. Izuku continued. Does that mean I have a shot at being a hero now? 𝗏𝗏𝗏 spent the next few seconds in silence. Truth be told, Izuku didn't care about All Might's answer. He was determined. Never mind telling his mother, or bragging about it to Bakugo. He couldn't care less if Bakugo would beat him up when he learned little powerless Deku actually had a quirk. A quirk that, even if it can't harm the sludge villain, was still used to save him. There he was, having discovered a quirk after years of perhaps practically begging the universe for him to be a late bloomer. Izuku knew the kind of devastation a child would have felt once the doctors told him he couldn't get any quirk that would make him similar to his heroes, or the kind of denial Izuku had taken up as he grew older, knowing the kids he used to play with will eventually become superheroes while he stayed firmly rooted on the ground. Usually, a person who discovers they have something that makes them unique will want to make it known to the rest of the world. Everyone deserves to be proud of something they have or have done. I want to make sure no one else will get hurt the same way I have, Izuku said. He looked at All Might, but his mind's eye showed him the back of a child left behind by his peers as they ran towards the horizon. He can finally nudge his younger self to run with them. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 simply smiled. Do you know the reason why I transformed earlier and saved you and your friend? He asked, somewhat rhetorically. Even though I told you I can only be All Might for a few hours every day. Izuku slowly shook his head. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 took this as a sign to continue. I saw you go in there and rush to save Bakugo. Mind you, a former friend who used to torment you. He added. The emphasis didn't sting as much when Izuku heard it now. Even if it meant you could die. Izuku almost managed to open his mouth to answer, but 𝗏𝗏𝗏 interrupted him. This was before you knew you even had a quirk, he said. You could have died if I hadn't arrived. Humans are not predisposed to bring themselves in danger. Only a few people have the courage to do that. Izuku paused at the thought. All Might was right. He never really has given much thought, even during their walk together. Shops have already transitioned into houses and orange skies transformed into an even warmer hue, and yet Izuku hadn't even remembered the kind of danger he put himself in a while ago. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 continued, interrupting Izuku's train of thought. That should have been my job, keeping you safe, 𝗏𝗏𝗏 said. I shouldn't have cared about my life. That was the risk I knew I had to take when I started doing this. He paused. You reminded me of that, 𝗏𝗏𝗏. No, All Might said. In my eyes, quirk or no quirk, you're already a hero. The words went from one ear and straight out of the next. It took Izuku a few seconds to interpret what the world's #1 pro hero had said, although it only took an instant for the water to start surging from his eyes. Quirk or no quirk, you're already a hero. Izuku didn't realize how the words, in that order, had forced his eyes to water on command. Maybe it's because he spent the entirety of his childhood being told that having no quirk meant he couldn't fight villains. That he couldn't make a difference. That he couldn't be a hero. He could still see how vivid the silhouette of Bakugo, ever the figure on a pedestal, was looking down on him all this time. You can't be a hero, was something he heard almost every day, that it had practically been the only version of the sentence that existed in his head. And here is All Might in front of him. His most vulnerable form now a blur with all the tears flowing from Izuku's face, telling him, from the world's #1 pro hero to basically nobody, that he can. It's no surprise Izuku had begun clutching his chest as he fell on his knees. The sentence wasn't absolute. The words were released into the world. At first, Toshinori wondered what he'd done to cause the scene. Toshinori almost panicked at the sight, but he realized he was exactly like the teenager before him when Nana had affirmed his own potential. Before he became her apprentice. Before he inherited it. Toshinori looked at Izuku and saw himself. He's the one. He thought about it during their entire journey, the entire time Izuku narrated his experiences. Izuku might not have said it, but Toshinori knew the youngster had tried his damnedest not to snap and hurt Bakugo the same he had done to him. That was admirable, truly a mark of someone who had the makings of a hero. Then again, not everyone is perfect. Toshinori heard from Izuku's voice the pent-up rage and frustration from all the years of pain he experienced. He couldn't exactly blame the youngster. Kids as bright and kind as him often carried the burden of understanding. A burden that would make the likes of Izuku let it go simply because they understand, while others lash out in ways they know they can. An injustice in Toshinori's eyes, and even more perhaps from the perspective of Izuku. Should he receive this gift, this responsibility, this burden, would he be able to maintain this burden of understanding? Would this child not use this for revenge, especially when he finally realizes he can have the power to change everything? Toshinori braced himself. Now comes the hard part. Izuku cried when he noticed the thin figure now knelt in front of him. For someone he thought was frail and skeleton-like, Toshinori's hands were firm when he held him. He propped him up. Izuku still wiped his tears with his arms. "Thank you," Izuku said, still in between breaths. "I didn't know I would see cry. This just means so much. Why, you have no idea." "Actually, I do," Toshinori said. Firmly, which is what caught Izuku's attention. The tears started to stop, and Izuku started to zone in back on the conversation. What do you mean?" "I have to be honest, I don't know where to start," Toshinori said as he scratched his head in embarrassment. He pondered for a moment as though finding his words. He shook his head. If he wanted to ask Izuku to do this, he had to come from a place of complete honesty. Toshinori braced himself. "Here goes. I'm actually quirkless." Izuku almost groaned. Not in pain, but in frustration. "Oh, come on," the youngster almost whispered. "Not this again." Toshinori smiled, but he also chuckled a bit. "No, I am not pranking you. I truly am quirkless." Izuku snorted in derision but fell silent when Toshinori didn't talk any further. "You're not joking?" Toshinori nodded. He had some time to think where to start. He figured this might be the best direction. The world called All Might the symbol of peace because he represented a light that saved the world from darkness, and all those things the news liked to say about him, Toshinori said. He probably wondered if Izuku was noticing the way he chose his words. The youngster nodded, so he paid no heed to his thoughts. "Well, there is some modicum of truth to that," he added. "I mean, you really are a light in the dark," Izuku said, finally handing the phone to him. "You're an inspiration." No, Toshinori said, now pocketing it, and remembering where he put it, and then nudging at Izuku to continue walking. And as a traffic light stopped them close to the highway, Toshinori continued. "You ever wondered why All Might never asked the media to change the symbol of peace into something, I dunno, less overwhelming?" Toshinori asked as they crossed the road. Izuku was silent for a good half-minute as they passed bystanders and other groups of students walking and biking by. He finally shook his head. "I never thought about it. I thought he just liked it?" Toshinori almost laughed. Izuku understood the kind of wordplay he wanted with his identity in public. All Might was a completely different entity for people who knew who he was. He continued. "All Might could always ask to be called the world's mightiest hero, the Light Knight, your friendly neighborhood avenger, and all sorts of fancier titles," Toshinori said. "He chose the symbol of peace because it's true." Izuku's eyes widened, like he finally understood. Toshinori nodded in affirmation. "The symbol of peace is a mantle." Izuku nodded slowly, as though trying to follow the train of thought. "Yeah, whosoever holds the title of All Might is the symbol of peace, kind of thing." But what's that got to do with being quirkless? 𝗧𝗏𝗡 shook his head slowly. No, young Midoriya, he said, chuckling lightning. I'm not the symbol of peace because I'm all might, and I'm not all might because I'm the symbol of peace. Izuku scratched his head. You're just mixing things up. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 sighed. Okay, let's put it this way. The symbol of peace is just a title, he finally said. All Might became the symbol because the world needed him to be. Okay, Izuku said, as though with acknowledgement that words were said, but not that he understood. But how can you be quirkless if you can do a Detroit smash? Are you wearing armor or something? 𝗧𝗏𝗡 shook his head. If you know All Might well, and I know you do, you know he doesn't want to wear armor. He then reduced himself to a whisper. And don't mention him like we're the same person. Izuku skipped the part where was supposed to apologize, as though he's chasing a train of thought. Okay, but no human can physically do what you do. No one can just get a hulking physique in a snap. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 smiled. He's getting there. Alright, so how do you surmise I can transform? Izuku put his fingers on his chin, an arm over the other, and started thinking. It took a few seconds before his eyes widened like an owl's. He whispered, Quirk transfer. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 nodded. The kid was indeed smart. Dish, that's possible. That's only a theory. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 nodded, still. It's very possible. Mine has been happening for a long time. Izuku could only blink. Oh. So you're just like me then? No, I'm just like you. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 looked around him as they started walking on a relatively quiet street. There was no one around him. Within the next instant, 𝗧𝗏𝗡 exploded into a puff of smoke, surprising even Izuku. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 was no more. Beside Izuku was now the hulking All Might, with a physique that almost popped out of 𝗧𝗏𝗡's previously baggy clothing. What you're looking at is the manifestation of my quirk one for all. All Might, deep as his voice was, told Izuku. It was not a booming voice of a hero's, but rather a deep one of a teacher to a student. This is a culmination of the energy left behind the quirks of many other users before me. Izuku could only reply with, cool. All Might noticed the way Izuku looked at him with awe. Sometimes, he forgets he's the world's #1 pro hero. He shouldn't do this often. He felt the pain starting to curl up from his stomach, but for this youngster, for this demonstration, he had to endure. I chose to be the symbol of peace not because this quirk has made me strong. All Might continued as he stayed in place. The pain started to spread around his body. 𝗧𝗏𝗡 could feel his heart wanting to give out, but he ignored it. But because I owe it to those before me to do what they couldn't in their lifetime, save lives. Izuku nodded. Being All Might doesn't mean being the symbol of peace, All Might said. Becoming the symbol of peace means fulfilling a promise, not just to my predecessors, but to the world. Izuku nodded. Much slower. It's like the point is slowly being lost. All Might understood this. He had to stop with the metaphors. His time was running out anyway. Which is why there is no light way to say this. All Might started, before a puff of smoke had transformed his hulking physique into that of the thin 𝗧𝗏𝗡. This moment felt like it took forever to finish. Inside 𝗧𝗏𝗡's head remained a man in conflict. Things were already set in stone. I already assigned Togata-kun to the role. Would Izuku really measure up to you? His best. Truth be told, this was not the part where 𝗧𝗏𝗡 was most concerned. The kid had just learned about having a quirk all this time. Was now really the time to spoil the festivities with such a responsibility? And yet, 𝗧𝗏𝗡 remembered that each day passed without a successor to properly train is a day that more evil can spread in the world. A child like Izuku will make it. He felt it. Nana-senpai probably felt it when she saw him, too. A part of Izuku felt this wasn't for theatrics, especially when he saw 𝗧𝗏𝗡 coughing BLD. He looked at Izuku matter-of-factly, like it's precisely because of this, the BLD he had just wiped from his mouth, that they were having this conversation. I want you to be my successor. Izuku's head almost tilted to the side at the question. Wait, why, you're kidding, right? Izuku said, almost with a chuckle. Again, 𝗧𝗏𝗡 stared at him. Come on, he reduced himself to a whisper. All Might, and then returned to his normal register. Surely there are more qualified pro heroes out there. 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝐻 was quick to shake his head. Not with your kind of heart, he said. He raises his shirt, revealing what remained of his side torso from the brutal outcome of the mission years ago that left him with his debilitating condition. I don't have a lot of time, Izuku, 𝗏𝗏𝗡 said as he coughed. What happened to my body can't be repaired with modern medicine. I will have to retire soon. Izuku didn't expect the word to instill a sense of dread. Retire, he repeated. As in, stop it all. It's that bad. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 could only nod. I only have years at best. Why you have to search for someone strong then? Izuku said. He almost screamed until he willed himself to pipe down. Anyone would panic. Is Endeavor strong enough? Maybe Hawks can help. We need to find someone fast. The world can't lose their inspiration. 𝗏𝗏𝗡 nodded in the affirmative, faster this time. That's why it has to be you. It has to be young, someone who can inspire the next generation. Izuku shuddered at the thought. Someone weak like me can't become a symbol of peace. Maybe Bakugo. Izuku felt the pain of the thought physically. He couldn't bear completing it, even though a part of him knew this was a more practical step. He looked at 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏. You said pro heroes need to risk their lives all the time, so they need power to do it, he said. My eyes turned green to red. I literally just learned I could do that minutes ago. Now you spring me with the invitation to become your replacement. You do realize how crazy that sounds. He almost wanted to continue with, a weakling like me can't become the world's greatest hero. That's the biggest insult I have ever heard. Not true, 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏 said as he coughed once more. I initially said pro heroes always risk their lives, so they need power to make sure they can save others. I didn't say they needed powers that can defeat villains. Izuku wanted to nod, but something in his head itched. Like something was amiss. Yeah, but logically speaking, changing eye colors can't really save people from, like, earthquakes and such. 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏 chuckled. You're the one not using logic, young Midoriya. Izuku almost pouted. He felt just the tiniest bit of insult there. But before he could do anything, 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏 continued. Who said it's got to be your power? 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 waited for a few seconds before Izuku started shaking his head. Surely he doesn't mean. I want to make you my apprentice, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 said. I want you to take my quirk at the right time. Again, words in a particular order Izuku didn't exactly expect to come together and directed at him. Again, Izuku scratched his head. Did you forget the part a few seconds ago where we said I could only change my eye color? You saw how I did not defeat the sludge villain, right? Something tickled inside Izuku. Somehow, after he learned 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 wanted him to get his powers made something deep inside Izuku warm up with. He replayed the scene in his head, Bakugo kicking him on the stomach, Bakugo kicking his hand as he reached for his hero journal. He imagined catching his foot with a gesture. Or, hell, Bakugo following through but Izuku not moving an inch. How exactly does All Might feel when he's punched but he isn't hurt, anyway? Someone, inside Izuku smiled. Oh boy, the expression in Bakugo faces if that happens. And somehow, Izuku lifted himself from the depths of these thoughts and resurfaced in their conversation. It's easy for anyone with a quirk to dash straight into battle to fight another quirk user, 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏𝗏 said. You'll be on equal ground, so the stakes aren't as high. You on the other hand, he paused, evidently for effect, spent most your life quirkless. And yet you saved your bully. You could have left him for dead, yet you didn't. Izuku almost felt the shame filling his body. Oh, the temptation was there, was his only thought, and the relief that he hadn't followed this instinct. For a moment, Izuku was dumbfounded to have these thoughts. They were his, but also weren't. My point is, 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏𝗏 continued, I'm not looking for the most powerful person. I'm looking for someone who knows exactly what it means to be weak, to be powerless. Someone who knows how I felt. Izuku couldn't deny the way the words stung when he'd heard them. He may have had a quirk, but having his eye color changed doesn't exactly scream superhero. Who would he be, boy? But, somehow he understood. He and All Might, no, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, were quirkless. Izuku spent years enduring the pain, the hate for what he was. And somehow, no matter how tempting it would be to fight, a part of him held back. It's easy to isolate someone when they're misunderstood. It was probably easy for Bakugo and his peers to pick on him because, well, he's different. He's probably a walking target. If the next All Might did have a powerful quirk, would they even know the difference? I need my successor to understand why they can't stop at nothing to save lives, Toshinori said. I need someone to go above and beyond. All Might's catchphrase echoed in Izuku's head. Plus ultra. I met that person today. Truth be told, Izuku couldn't comprehend how wild this day had become. He just wanted All Might to tell him he could be a hero if he wanted, not if he could be a hero now. Anyone would be ecstatic at the prospect of receiving All Might's powers. To be the greatest, to lift cars, endure powerful hits, to run at incredible speeds, to leap past buildings. Izuku could feel his younger self tugging at his uniform, jumping and telling him to say yes. They can go to places they've never been before. People will want to take pictures with him, ask for autographs, name babies after him. Hell, maybe Bakugo will even kneel and beg for forgiveness. A part of Izuku, something deep inside, snickered at the thought. Then again, Izuku also wondered. He might not be as inspiring as All Might, but he could probably stop other kids like him from suffering at the hands of other kids like Bakugo. Izuku sighed. That should be enough. So, what do you say? Are you with me? Izuku's eyes fixated on All Might's, no, Toshinori's, grin, something that hasn't practically changed even if his idol's true form had turned out much skinnier than he had actually thought. The youngster stared at Toshinori, still in disbelief that he had actually seen the hidden identity of the world's #1 pro hero more times than, well, anyone could have. If this was a dream, now's a pretty good time to wake him up. Young Midoriya, Toshinori exclaimed, catching Izuku's attention. Toshinori was now extending an arm. I said, are you with me? Sorry. Izuku scratched his head in embarrassment before taking All Might's hand. His grip was firm, but warm enough to convince Izuku this wasn't a dream. It was all real. He's actually more awake than he's ever been in his life. All Might didn't just affirm to Izuku that he could be a hero. He practically wanted him to be a successor. Izuku simply nodded. He took in everything around him, the chirping of birds as they flew to the horizon, the orange of the skies about to send the sun to its final goodbyes, the subtle cold of the night breeze, even the honking of traffic across the horizon. He took the details of the road he used to walk alone after school, the houses he passed, the way people left their cars outside their homes after returning from work. He took note of his uniform, the way his backpack brushed against his shoulder, All Might's white shirt and jeans, their very exchange of hands. Every detail. All of this will be the last thing he sees before he changes his life forever. Toshinori left the child deep in thought. It's not like he asked him an easy question. Izuku moved his eyes around him, as though thinking intently. As he should. And when Izuku's eyes moved, he probably didn't realize All Might was following with a gaze of his own. When Toshinori dropped the question, Izuku's eyes had immediately gone from green to red, as though he sent the kid into an adrenaline rush. There it is again, the red eyes, Toshinori thought. This time, Izuku hadn't clutched his head in pain. It activated on instinct. He wouldn't be surprised if the quirk had manifested at a moment like this, if Izuku had begun hyperfocusing as soon as he started to realize the gravity of what he just asked. He was probably thinking of what this implied, of all the possibilities this would produce, of all the things that would change when he responded. Toshinori didn't have a similar quirk, but his mind probably raced just as fast as Izuku's. Whatever the kid decides can never be changed. He cannot give up and quit when they're in too deep, especially when he takes the quirk. Toshinori was unsure the kid could even make it that far, but this was a risk he had to take. This was a risk the youngster should realize he had to take. Pro heroes need to risk their lives all the time, was something Toshinori said to the youngster. If Izuku really wanted to be a pro hero, now was the time to prove it. And even then, there was the matter of making sure Izuku will use the quirk for the right reasons. Toshinori felt the pang of spite and rage inside Izuku when he described Bakugo. He could only hope to still be there to ensure Izuku is guided to channel this rage appropriately, because a part of him felt Izuku was always at the tipping point. Izuku was no mere child whose hopes and dreams were always to save others. He was not always liked, not always respected, and not always treated fairly. To attain one for all means slingshotting one's way into the pinnacle of powers. Was this something Izuku will be able to truly use for good? Toshinori was glad Izuku hadn't had his eyes on him, because a split second would be long enough to see the doubt that formed in the pro-hero's eyes. Am I making the right choice? Was something Toshinori asked the entire time. Was it unfair to assume the worst, if the world was at stake? Was it unfair to assume the worst in Izuku, when he should deservedly be in a position to beat the ever-loving CRP out of Bakugo for everything he's done? Would Izuku truly be the bigger person, if he doesn't teach Bakugo a lesson, to ensure others would no longer be harmed the same way he has? All of these were interesting ethical discussions for sure. Unfortunately for Izuku, all of these were questions he will have to answer when he's taken the new mantle. This was no mere responsibility. He was asking a youngster with a quirk that somehow only changes his eye color to replace him as the symbol of peace and everything that entailed. To eventually carry on a quirk burdened to protect the world. Izuku took a deep breath as though about to leap for a swim. Yes, the youngster simply said. And he moved himself into the pool. If only Toshinori could tell him its depth. The morning sun cast long shadows across Aldra Junior High's entrance, but for once, Izuku Midoriya didn't hug the walls or scan frantically for escape routes. Izuku's shoulders, usually hunched forward in perpetual anticipation of the next blow, stood straight and proud. Each step felt lighter than air, as if the weight of years of torment at Katsuki Bakugo's hands had evaporated overnight. All Might chose me. His hand unconsciously drifted to his backpack where his hero journal lay safely tucked away, the signature of the world's #1 pro hero having now graced its pages. Just a week ago, that same journal had been scarred by explosion marks, sailing through the air outside the classroom window. Now it felt like a badge of honor. I have a quirk. I actually have a quirk. The thought still didn't feel real. After years of doctor's visits confirming his quirklessness, after countless nights crying himself to sleep, after enduring endless taunts of Deku, here he was, chosen as the successor to the symbol of peace himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he walked through the school gates, Izuku noticed something odd. Students glanced his way and whispered behind their hands. Not the usual looks of pity or disdain he'd grown accustomed to, but something different. Some even pointed at their phones, huddled in small groups. Why are they? Then it hit him. The sludge villain incident. His reckless charge into danger. His attempt at saving Bakugo from the clutches of a villain even the pro-heroes didn't dare provoke. Heat crept up his neck and flooded his cheeks as he remembered the viral videos that must be circulating, the quirkless nobody rushing in where pro-heroes feared to tread. What would 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 think? The thought of his childhood friend, no, his bully, brought a complex mix of emotions. Would Bakugo be even more furious that the useless Deku had tried to save him? Or would yesterday's events somehow shift their dynamic? Izuku couldn't decide which possibility terrified him more. His feet carried him through familiar hallways, each step feeling surreal. Was this really the same school he dreaded entering every morning? The same corridors where he'd perfected the art of becoming invisible? Today they felt different. Today he felt different. I will be a hero, he told himself. All Might believes in me. As Izuku reached for his classroom door, the usual cacophony of morning chatter and quirk-enhanced horseplay leaked through. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders the way he imagined All Might would. The door slid open with a decisive clack. The classroom fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled toward him, including a particularly intense crimson glare from the back of the room. Izuku stood in the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs, but for the first time in his life, he didn't immediately look away. This is my new beginning. His gaze swept across the room, inevitably drawn to the back corner where Bakugo sat. Their eyes met briefly before Bakugo clicked his tongue and turned away with an irritated "Feech." The silence stretched uncomfortably, and Izuku wondered why everyone hadn't returned to their usual morning chaos until, ahem. The sound came from directly behind him. Izuku nearly jumped out of his skin, his face now red as he realized he'd been blocking the doorway. Their professor stood there, one eyebrow raised. Izuku scurried to his seat after an apology, his momentary confidence wavering. So much for a dramatic entrance. The morning dragged on with excruciating slowness. Every scratch of pencil against paper, every cough, every shuffle seemed magnified in Izuku's heightened awareness. He could feel the weight of unspoken questions hanging in the air, pressing down on him like a physical force. Just breathe. Focus on class. Pretend everything's normal. But nothing was normal. Not anymore. His classmates' glances burned against his skin. Phones appeared between textbook pages, their screens displaying that moment. His moment of either madness or bravery, he still wasn't sure which. The video had gone viral overnight. The supposedly quirkless kid charging headlong into danger while pro-heroes stood paralyzed. In a society built on the backs of people who had quirks, a heroic act caught on cam might get viral quickly but would also get stale just as fast. Even then, this was Izuku's first time, and he wasn't quite sure how to feel about the attention. What would all might think if he saw me now, hiding from attention? Each time someone whispered behind their hand, Izuku's stomach twisted into knots. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, at least, not this kind of attention. Usually, he only drew notice when Bakugo needed a target for his frustrations. Speaking of which, Bakugo's desk creaked under his white-knuckled grip whenever he caught someone watching the video. Small wisps of smoke curled up from his palms, carrying the acrid scent of nitroglycerin. His usual groupies maintained a careful distance, sensing the storm brewing beneath his silence. Has 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 always looked this uncertain? During the literature PRD, someone's phone accidentally played the audio from yesterday's incident. The sound of explosions and screaming filled the classroom for a brief second before being hastily silenced. Izuku noticed how Bakugo's shoulders tensed, how his jaw clenched. Tight enough to crack teeth. Somehow, Izuku sensed a part of him deep inside that made him want to smile. He remembers being helpless. Just like I always was. The morning crawled toward lunch break, tension building like static before a storm. Izuku could feel it coming. The confrontation was inevitable. Bakugo's pride wouldn't allow anything else. When the lunch bell finally rang, Izuku's hands were trembled slightly as he packed his books. That's when Bakugo made his move, crossing the classroom in 3 quick strides. The explosive impact of his hands on Izuku's desk sent pencils rolling to the floor. Small explosions crackled from his palms, scorching the wood. "Show it, Deku," he growled, voice low and dangerous. "Stop acting like you're better than me. Those eyes of yours yesterday. You've been hiding something, haven't you, you sneaky bastard?" Izuku's eyes widened. He noticed. But how? A cold wave of panic washed over Izuku. Had his eyes changed in front of Bakugo? He hadn't even noticed, too caught up in the desperate need to save his former friend. I don't know what you're talking about, 𝐀𝐮𝐿, Izuku stammered, genuine confusion mixing with his longing to keep all this a secret. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He flinched when he realized he just called him 𝐀𝐮𝐿. "Don't play dumb with me." Bakugo's voice rose, cracking slightly at the edges. "You're looking down on me, aren't you? Think you're hot SHT now because of yesterday? Because you played hero." The word hero struck something deep inside Izuku. All Might's words echoed in his mind. You can become a hero. The trembling in his hands stopped. The fear that had been his constant companion for so many years suddenly felt distant. Something snapped inside him, not violently, but like a chain finally breaking after years of strain. Maybe it was the weight of years of torment, or maybe it was All Might's words still ringing in his ears, but suddenly he found himself standing, his hands slamming against his desk with enough force to make the whole class jump. "I have no idea what you're talking about." His voice came out sharp and clear, nothing like his usual mumble. It carried across the suddenly silent classroom like a thunderclap. "And if this is your twisted way of saying thank you, then fine, I accept your half-butted apology." Did I just say that? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the usual sounds of lunch break from the hallway seemed muffled, as if the whole world held its breath. Students pretending not to watch now stared openly, phones forgotten in slack hands. Someone's lunchbox clattered to the floor, the sound sharp as gunfire in the quiet. Bakugo's face cycled through several emotions, shock, rage, and something that might have been embarrassment, before settling on a scowl. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled them back from Izuku's desk, leaving scorched handprints behind. For a moment, just a moment, he looked like that scared teenager from yesterday, trapped and helpless in the villain's grasp. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the classroom, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. The bang of the classroom door echoed like a judge's gavel, final and decisive. Izuku slowly sank back into his chair, his hands trembling slightly. The adrenaline drained from his system, leaving him feeling hollow and somehow lighter. Around him, the classroom erupted into furious whispers, but they felt distant, unimportant. Where did that come from? He stared at his hands, still tingling from their impact with the desk. Yesterday, these same hands had clawed desperately at the sludge villain, trying to save someone who had spent years making his life miserable. Today, they had helped him stand up to that same person. Maybe this really is a new beginning after all. Every dawn had its sunset, Toshinori Yagi mused, watching the dying light paint Tsukuba Municipal Beach Park in fierce oranges and deep crimsons. From his perch atop a rusted refrigerator, the beach's mountains of refuse cast long shadows across the sand, like the silhouettes of fallen giants. The sea breeze carried the tang of salt and metal, ruffling his unkempt blonde hair as he waited. Just yesterday, the sky wore these same colors when I caught that villain. Toshinori's sunken eyes scanning the beach's entrance. The memory of the previous day's events played vividly in his mind. The sludge villain's capture, the rooftop conversation, and most importantly, that remarkable moment when a supposedly quirkless boy had charged headlong into danger. That boy's eyes, they had shifted from emerald to a shade even more vibrant than the current sunset, though young Midoriya seemed utterly unaware of the transformation. The coincidence of finding both a worthy successor and an undiscovered quirk user in the same person made Toshinori's hollow laugh catch in his throat. Am I making the right choice? His fingers unconsciously traced the scar beneath his shirt. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, heavier than any villain he'd ever fought. Nana Shimura's face flashed in his memory, her determined smile, her unwavering faith in him. She had chosen him not for his power or skill, but for his burning longing to be a light in the darkness, to make a difference in a world that desperately needed heroes. Sometimes the brightest lights come from those who know darkness best, she had told him, her words carrying a weight he wouldn't understand until years later. In his presence, that philosophy had seemed almost defiant, a declaration that heroes could rise from anywhere, even in the shadow of evil. Now, in this era of peace that he'd helped build, perhaps it was time for a different kind of hero. Someone who understood not just the grand battles against villains, but the everyday struggles of those who felt powerless. Young Midoriya had shown that instinct, rushing to save even his tormentor without a second thought. But doubt gnawed at him. Should I really give such power to someone who's been bullied for so long? The thought made him shift uncomfortably on his makeshift seat. What if the weight of one for all becomes a tool for revenge rather than justice? What if years of being powerless has left scars too deep to? His troubled musings scattered as a familiar figure appeared at the beach's entrance. Young Midoriya moved like a cartoon burglar, each step tentative and wincing as debris shifted beneath his feet. The boy's eyes darted around nervously, clearly uncertain if he was even allowed to be there. Toshinori had to stifle a chuckle. He'd forgotten to mention that while the beach was technically private property, nobody had enforced that rule in years. He always walked straight home before. Toshinori recalled their conversation from yesterday. Every step he takes now is into new territory. And wasn't that what being a hero was about? Taking those first uncertain steps into unknown territory, driven not by confidence but by the simple longing to help others. The memory of yesterday's video footage flashed through his mind, Midoriya charging forward while others hesitated, his newly awakened quirk manifesting not in anger or fear, but in the desperate need to save someone who had caused him so much pain. Perhaps that was answer enough to his doubts. With a slight grunt, Toshinori stood up, feeling power surge through his withered frame. In a burst of steam and energy, All Might emerged, his massive form silhouetted against the dying sun. Young Midoriya. His voice boomed across the beach, carrying all the confidence his true form lacked. I am here. The boy's reaction was priceless. A yelp of surprise followed by a stumble that sent him sprawling onto a pile of worn tires. All Might's legendary laugh echoed across the water, genuine amusement mixing with fondness for his chosen successor. But beneath the theatrics, watching Midoriya scramble to his feet with that familiar mix of enthusiasm and nervousness, All Might felt his earlier doubts transforming into something else. This boy, who had known powerlessness intimately, might be exactly what the next generation of heroes needed, someone who understood that true heroism wasn't about wielding power, but about how you chose to use it. The real hardship is just beginning, young man, All Might thought, maintaining his bright smile as Midoriya rushed forward, already pulling out his notebook. But maybe that's exactly why you're the one who can show us what being a hero truly means. All Might, sir. Midoriya finally caught his breath, brushing sand from his uniform. What are you doing here? And where will we train? He then sank into a hilariously suspicious whisper. We're not even supposed to be on this beach, are we? All Might's perpetual smile widened as he gestured broadly at the trash-laden landscape. This, young Midoriya, is exactly where you will be training. By cleaning this entire beach. The boy's face cycled through several expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then something approaching panic. Clean the beach. Maybe you meant train at the beach. After we clean a small portion. Nope. All Might's booming laugh echoed across the water. You will clean this entire beach. Every last piece of trash, every abandoned appliance, every scrap of metal, all of it. The entire beach. Midoriya's eyes swept across the vast expanse of accumulated junk, his face paling slightly. Where do we start? Ah, young Midoriya, All Might raised one massive finger. There is no we in this training. This task is yours alone. Your training will be complete when you have restored this beach to its former glory, by yourself. But that could take forever. Then you'd better get started, shouldn't you? All Might's grin somehow managed to grow even wider. Watching the boy's expression, All Might caught a flicker of disappointment. He recognized it instantly, the same look he'd worn decades ago when Nana-senpai had tasked him with rehabilitating an abandoned park. You were expecting something more dramatic, weren't you, young man? Some secret technique or spectacular training montage. Before All Might could elaborate on the purpose of this seemingly mundane task, movement at the beach's entrance caught both their attention. A mother and child walked past, the little girl's hand clutched tightly in her mother's. Mama, can we go to the beach tomorrow? The child's voice carried clearly across the evening air. I want to play in the sand. I'm sorry, sweetie. The mother's voice was gentle but firm. The beach is too dirty now. We'll have to stay home. But this is where Daddy and I used to play. The girl's voice quivered slightly. We made the biggest sandcastles. I know, baby. The mother's squeeze of her daughter's hand was visible even from a distance. I miss him too. All Might watched as young Midoriya's expression transformed. The disappointment vanished, replaced by something fiercer, determination crystallizing in real time. Before All Might could say another word, the boy had already shed his school jacket and was attacking a nearby pile of debris with surprising vigor. A knowing smile spread across All Might's face as he watched his successor-to-be struggle with a waterlogged mattress. The boy had grasped the essential truth without needing it explained. A true hero's work wasn't always about flashy battles and dramatic rescues. Sometimes it was about the unglamorous tasks, the lengthy battles fought one small victory at a time, all in service of bringing smiles back to faces that had forgotten how. Midoriya's pace increased, his movements becoming more determined with each piece of trash he moved. The setting sun caught the sweat already beginning to bead on his forehead, making it gleam like the tears of frustration he was clearly fighting back. Yes, young Midoriya. This is exactly what it means to be a hero, All Might thought, his chest swelling with pride. Doing whatever it takes, no matter how impossible it seems, to make the world a better place, even if it's just one beach at a time. The sound of Midoriya's efforts echoed across the beach, the scrape of metal on metal, the thud of debris being sorted into piles, the occasional grunt of exertion. Each sound was a promise, a declaration that this impossible task would be completed, no matter how long it took. Nana-sensei, All Might thought, watching his chosen successor throw himself into the momentous task. I think I finally understand why you made me start with that park. Some lessons about heroism can't be taught. They have to be discovered through sweat and determination. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, but Midoriya showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, his pace had increased, as if the little girl's disappointed face had lit a fire within him that no amount of exhaustion could extinguish. The true mark of a hero, All Might mused, isn't in how they handle the big moments, but in how they approach the small ones. And young Midoriya, you're already showing signs of greatness. All Might, sir, Izuku had asked that first evening, after agreeing to the beach cleanup training. Oh my quirk, the one you said made my eyes turn red. Could you help me activate it again? Maybe it could help with the training. The symbol of peace's eternal smile had softened slightly. Young Midoriya, discovering the nature of your own power must be a personal journey. Learning to activate and control your newfound quirk by yourself will teach you valuable lessons about your limits and capabilities. He placed a massive hand on Izuku's shoulder. These lessons will be crucial when you inherit one for all. After all, how can you handle my power if you haven't yet mastered your own? Izuku paused, as though about to ask how he could figure it out when he's literally never experienced this before. He just nodded, realizing he added another seemingly impossible task to his growing list. Izuku caught himself slouching on his way to school and immediately straightened his spine. The memory of last night's little girl flashed in his mind, her disappointed face as she looked at the beach where she once played with her father. He squared his shoulders, lifted his chin slightly. I'm going to inherit the symbol of peace's power. Maybe I should start acting like it? The sun had barely crested the horizon when his alarm rang that morning. His muscles protested as he rolled out of bed, still sore from yesterday's impromptu beach cleanup. All Might's training schedule, meticulously written in his notebook, started with the basics: push-ups, 50 squats, 100 crunches, before breakfast. Plus ultra indeed, Izuku thought, his arms trembling as he finished the last push-up. The assortment of rusty weights and barbells he'd salvaged from the beach now occupied a corner of his room. His mother had raised an eyebrow at the peculiar collection but said nothing beyond a worried, "Be careful, Izuku." He cleaned and restored them as best he could, though they still carried the faint scent of sea salt. During his walk to school, Izuku mentally reviewed All Might's instructions. "Young Midoriya," he'd said, his voice unusually serious even in his muscled form, "the beach cleanup is your evening priority, but your studies cannot suffer. A hero must be able to balance multiple responsibilities. Plus," he'd added with his signature laugh, "your mother would kill me if your grades dropped." Assuming she learnt about him, of course. Balance. Like juggling dumbbells while doing homework. Lunch PRD brought new challenges. His bento box now contained a carefully measured portion of grilled chicken BRST, brown rice, steamed vegetables, and 2 hard-boiled eggs. His mother's surprise at his sudden dietary requests had been evident. "All this protein, Izuku. Are you planning something?" He'd fumbled through an explanation about joining a fitness club, while privately wondering if All Might's extensive nutritional knowledge came from personal experience or necessity. It was hard to imagine the skeletal Toshinori Yagi planning protein-rich meals. How does he maintain that muscled form on such a thin frame anyway? The routine settled into his bones over the next 2 months, each day adding another small change to Izuku Midoriya's transformation. His morning exercises evolved from desperate counting to measured breathing, from shaking muscles to controlled movement. The All Might poster on his wall watched his progress, that eternal smile seeming more encouraging with each passing day. Just 10 more. 9. Breakfast became a science: protein shakes, measured portions, and his mother's increasingly creative ways to incorporate eggs into every meal. She'd stopped asking questions after the first 2 weeks, instead throwing herself into researching athletic nutrition with the same obsessive detail her son usually reserved for hero analysis. School, however, became an unexpected battlefield of a different sort. The click-click-click of Izuku's grip trainer became a constant soundtrack to class, drawing curious glances from classmates who'd previously pretended he didn't exist. Some even started timing their own conversations to his rhythmic squeezing, 60 reps during English, 40 during math, 80 during history. But it was Bakugo's reaction that marked the most dramatic shift in classroom dynamics. Week 1. Confusion and irritation. Bakugo's explosions scorched his desk whenever Izuku rushed out after class, leaving behind only the lingering scent of caramel-like nitroglycerin and unanswered challenges. Oi, Deku! Where the F do you think you're going? Week 3. Suspicious observation. Izuku caught Bakugo watching his reflection in the classroom window, red eyes narrowing at each grip trainer squeeze, each protein bar consumed during breaks, and each new callus forming on Izuku's formerly soft hands. Is he taking notes about me? Week 5. Attempted confrontation. Bakugo started arriving earlier, positioning himself by the classroom door like a predator waiting to ambush prey. But Izuku's new schedule meant arriving just before the bell, slipping into his seat with barely a moment to spare, his breakfast protein shake still cold in his bag. Titanic. Bakugo's trademark sound of disapproval grew louder with each thwarted attempt. Week 7. Outright fury. The desk next to Izuku's bore scorch marks from Bakugo's increasingly volatile quirk. Their classmates had learned to keep a wider berth around both of them, creating an invisible buffer zone that crackled with unspoken tension. What the F are you playing at, nerd? Think you're too good for me now? Izuku barely registered the threats anymore. His mind was too full of other numbers. Pounds lifted, calories consumed, trash cleared, minutes until his next workout. The old fear still lived somewhere in his chest, but it was buried under layers of purpose and determination. Even the teachers noticed the change. During a particularly difficult math exam, Izuku's grip trainer kept its steady rhythm while his other hand solved equations. Their math teacher, who'd always treated Izuku with distant pity, actually smiled when collecting his paper. "Whatever you're doing, Midoriya-kun," she'd said quietly, "keep it up." Bakugo had blown up his pencil case after that. By week 8, the classroom had developed new unspoken rules. No one mentioned Izuku's new muscles, gradually becoming visible under his uniform. No one commented on how he'd started meeting Bakugo's glares with steady green eyes, eyes that occasionally seemed to flash with something else, something unidentifiable, when the confrontations grew too heated. And absolutely no one talked about how the classroom's former punching bag now carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had better things to do than play victim. The few times Bakugo managed to corner him, Izuku's responses shifted from stammered apologies to simple statements. "Sorry, Kaken, I have somewhere to be. Can't stay, I'm on a schedule. Maybe another time." Each dismissal seemed to physically pain Bakugo, like Izuku's newfound independence was a personal insult. During their final confrontation of the second month, Bakugo's quirk had actually set off the fire alarm. "Fight me, you demon nerd." "I have training," Izuku had replied simply, already halfway out the door, leaving behind a classroom of stunned faces and one increasingly frustrated childhood friend. 2 months brought changes that Izuku hadn't expected. The physical transformations were obvious. Calloused hands, developing muscles, improved posture. But it was the subtle changes that fascinated him most. Pain had become an old friend, a familiar companion that marked progress rather than punishment. The burning in his muscles after a heavy lifting session felt different from the ache of Bakugo's explosions. It was pain with purpose, discomfort with direction. One evening, sorting through a particularly stubborn pile of scrap metal, Izuku found himself thinking about his mysterious quirk. The headaches that had accompanied its activation during the sludge villain incident had been excruciating, like his skull was trying to split apart. But now, after 2 months of pushing his body to its limits daily, he wondered if that pain would feel different too. Would it still hurt the same way? Or have I gotten stronger in that way too? He'd tried countless times to activate it during his training sessions. Sometimes, when the weight seemed impossible to lift or the trash pile too daunting to move, he'd concentrate until his head throbbed, trying to summon that same desperate energy that had emerged when Bakugo was in danger. But his eyes remained stubbornly green, reflecting in the scattered broken mirror pieces and chrome bumpers littering the beach. Each evening, as he hauled away another refrigerator or dismantled another rusted car, Izuku would picture that little girl's face. Sometimes, when his muscles screamed and his lungs burned, he imagined her playing on the clean sand, building sandcastles where trash heaps once stood. It made the impossible task feel more possible. This is what being a hero means, he thought one evening, watching the sunset paint the diminishing trash piles in golden light. Not just fighting villains, but making the world better, one small piece at a time. His phone buzzed, a reminder to do his history homework. Izuku smiled, reaching for his grip trainer with his free hand. 2 months ago, this juggling act would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like purpose. Maybe this is what All Might meant by balance. The next day would bring more challenges, more weights to lift, more trash to clear, more studies to balance. But for the first time in his life, Izuku felt ready. Not just ready, eager. After all, he thought, starting his evening run home, this is just the beginning. That evening, watching the sunset paint the diminishing trash piles in familiar crimson and gold, Izuku caught his reflection in a partially cleaned refrigerator door. His eyes remained their usual green, but something else had changed in them, a determination, a purpose that hadn't been there before. Maybe 𝐴𝐵, his mysterious quirk, wasn't about forcing it to appear, but about becoming someone worthy of its power. After all, hadn't All Might said something similar about one for all? 2 powers waiting for me to be ready, he thought, starting his evening run home, muscles pleasantly sore and mind clear. But first, I have a beach to clean. 2 months of hit-and-run mentoring wasn't exactly what 𝐶𝐻𝐼 had envisioned when he chose his successor. Their meetings had become a carefully choreographed dance around his hero schedule. 20 minutes between rescues here, 45 minutes after patrol there. Sometimes they'd share convenience store onigiri on a rooftop, Izuku chattering excitedly about his progress while 𝐶𝐻𝐼 checked the time, always conscious of his dwindling minutes in his muscled form. Sorry, young Midoriya, duty calls, had become his most frequent phrase, second only to his real trademark, I am here. Today's meeting spot was their usual haunt, Takoba Beach, now notably clearer than 2 months ago. 𝐶𝐻𝐼 arrived early, his gaunt form perched on a partially cleared section while he watched the sunset paint the remaining trash heaps in familiar golds and crimsons. His hand absently patted the pocket of his oversized suit, feeling the small rectangle within. Is this enough? He wondered, not for the first time. Am I doing enough? The sound of footsteps on sand announced Izuku's arrival. The boy's transformation was already visible, his shoulders straighter, his steps more assured. Even the way he carried his school bag had changed, the weight of books and that ever-present hero journal no longer seeming to drag him down. All Might. Izuku's face lit up with its usual mixture of awe and determination. Even after 2 months, that pure admiration hadn't dimmed. Young Midoriya. 𝐶𝐻𝐼 transformed in a burst of steam, his signature smile hiding the taste of copper in his mouth. Excellent work on this section. The beach is starting to remember what it once was. They fell into their usual routine, Izuku demonstrating his improved lifting technique, 𝐶𝐻𝐼 offering corrections to his form, both of them pretending not to notice how the hero's eyes kept darting to his watch. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Izuku's progress had exceeded expectations, or maybe it was the growing weight of responsibility 𝐶𝐻𝐼 felt with each passing day. Young Midoriya, he said finally, reaching into his pocket. I have something for you. The photo card seemed almost absurdly small in his massive hand, just a simple promotional shot from his golden age, signed with his characteristic flourish. He'd spent an embarrassingly long time choosing which one to give, wondering if it could possibly make up for his perpetual absences. It's not much considering how hard you've been working, but he didn't get to finish. Izuku's eyes had already welled up with tears, his hands trembling as they reached for the card. All Might. This is. The boy's voice cracked. This is amazing. I've never seen this variant before. This was from the limited edition series after the Hokkaido incident, wasn't it? The holographic finish is different from the regular release, and watching his successor clutch the photo card like it was made of gold, Toshinori felt something in his chest tighten. Not the usual pain from his injury, but something else. "I'm sorry, young Midoriya," he said softly, his ever-present smile gaining a tinge of melancholy. "A proper mentor should be more present, especially considering the power I'm preparing you to inherit. But as the symbol of peace..." No. Izuku quickly wiped his eyes. "I understand. You have to be there for everyone. That's what being the symbol of peace means." "Exactly." All Might placed a massive hand on the boy's shoulder. "And that's another lesson you must learn. This power, one for all, it's not just about strength. It's about what that strength means to others. The joy you're feeling right now, holding that card, that's what you must learn to give to others. Because someday, when I'm no longer here..." "All Might." Izuku's protest was immediate. "Don't talk like that." "No, young Midoriya." His voice grew serious. "We must face reality. Every symbol must eventually step down. What matters is what we leave behind, not just power, but hope. The ability to make others feel safe, to make them smile even in their darkest moments." Toshinori looked at his successor, this boy who had charged at a villain without a quirk, who was transforming a beach one piece of trash at a time, who could still cry with joy over a simple photo card, and wondered if he was doing enough to prepare him. Not just for One for All's power, but for its purpose. "Am I teaching you everything you need to know, young Midoriya? Are these rushed meetings and brief training sessions enough to show you what it truly means to be the symbol of peace?" The familiar taste of copper touched his tongue, warning him that his time in this form was running short. Soon he would have to leave, rushing off to another rescue, another crisis, another moment where the world needed its symbol of peace. But watching Izuku carefully tuck the photo card into his hero journal, handling it with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts, Toshinori allowed himself to hope. Maybe the most important lessons weren't found in the time they spent together, but in the moments between, in a boy's determination to clean a beach alone, in his willingness to shed tears of joy over a simple gift, in his pure longing to help others despite having been helpless himself for so long. Perhaps, Toshinori thought, feeling his time limit approaching, "You're teaching me as much as I'm teaching you." The photo card felt warm in Izuku's hands as he left the beach, his fingers tracing All Might's signature for the 100th time. The holographic finish caught the last rays of sunset, throwing rainbow patterns across his face. His heart felt so full it might burst. "All Might believes in me. He really believes in me." The peaceful moment shattered as a familiar voice cut through the evening air. Well, if it isn't the wannabe hero." Bakugo's silhouette materialized against a street lamp, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. Small explosions crackled in his palms, casting his face in harsh light and deeper shadows. His trademark sneer looked more menacing than usual in the uneven illumination. "𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫." Izuku's hand instinctively tightened around the photo card, careful not to bend it. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you, obviously." Bakugo dropped from his perch, landing with predatory grace. "Been watching you sneaking off to this dump every day. Think you're some kind of hotshot now, after that stunt with the sludge villain. How long has he been following me?" "I'm not." Izuku started, but Bakugo was already moving. The punch came fast, faster than before, but something had changed. Izuku saw it coming, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. The impact rocked his head back, pain blooming across his jaw, but his feet stayed planted. That didn't hurt as much as it used to. Surprise flickered across Bakugo's face, quickly replaced by fury. "Still standing? Getting cocky, deh." A dull throb started behind Izuku's eyes, different from the ache in his jaw. Something hot and unfamiliar stirred in his chest, like magma trying to surface. Each heartbeat seemed to pump more of that molten feeling through his veins. "I'm not trying to be cocky," Izuku managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I just want to what?" Bakugo snarled, stepping closer. "To be a hero. To look down on me." Another explosion popped in his palm. You're still nothing but a quirkless nobody playing pretend. The throbbing in Izuku's head intensified. That hot feeling in his chest wasn't just anger. It felt older, deeper, like tapping into something that had always been there, waiting. His vision began to sharpen, the world taking on an almost crystalline clarity. This rage. It doesn't feel like mine. Where is it coming from? You've been hiding something, haven't you? Bakugo's voice seemed to come from far away, nearly drowned out by the pounding in Izuku's skull. Ever since that day. Those eyes of yours. For a moment, Izuku caught his reflection in a nearby window. In the dying light, his eyes looked different, not their usual green, but something else, something that made the rage in his chest pulse stronger, hotter, redder. What's happening to me? Bakugo's eyes narrowed, scanning Izuku's face. The familiar rush of superiority wasn't coming. Usually, Izuku would be stammering, backing away, eyes downcast. But now he just stood there, breathing heavily, meeting his gaze with those strange eyes. Then Bakugo noticed something clutched in Izuku's hand. A glint of holographic finish caught the streetlight. What's that, nerd? Before Izuku could react, Bakugo snatched the card. His eyes widened as he recognized the signature. Oh my... How the hell did you get? Understanding dawned on his face, quickly twisted by rage. You've talked to him, haven't you? That's why you've been coming here. No, please, not that, Bakugo started to scream. He was my hero first. You're a quirkless nobody who doesn't deserve to even think about him. The sound of tearing paper cut through the evening air like a gunshot. Izuku watched, helpless, as the pieces of All Might's card fluttered to the ground. Something deep inside Izuku stirred. The rage didn't come all at once. It built like a wave, starting from somewhere ancient and dark. Each heartbeat pumped more of that molten feeling through his veins, building pressure behind his eyes. His vision blurred, not with tears, but with something else. Something red. This feeling. It's not normal anger. Before he knew what was happening, his fist was flying toward Bakugo's face. The punch connected with a satisfying crack, sending Bakugo stumbling back. For a moment, genuine surprise flashed across his face before being replaced by savage glee. Finally got some ball, huh, Deku. Bakugo wiped BLD from his lip, grinning. Let's see how tough you really are. What followed wasn't a fight so much as a brutal exchange. Bakugo fought like someone who picked fights for fun, all raw instinct and street-learned brutality. Each strike came with the confidence of someone who'd won more brawls than he'd lost. Explosions punctuated his attacks, leaving scorch marks on Izuku's uniform and angry red burns on his skin. Despite his improved physique from months of training, Izuku was clearly outmatched. All Might had taught him to lift, to endure, to persist, but not to fight. He tried to dodge, to weave away from Bakugo's attacks, but each attempted escape was met with a savage follow-up. An explosion to the chest sent him stumbling back, only to meet a knee to the gut. But Izuku didn't fall. Each hit rocked him, but months of hauling trash and lifting weights had hardened his body. Pain bloomed across his torso, but it was different now, not the sharp, overwhelming agony of past beatings, but something he could push through. I can take it, Izuku realized, spitting BLD. It hurts, but I can take it. The headache pounding behind his eyes made everything worse, throwing off his balance, clouding his judgment. BLD trickled from his split lip, and his ribs screamed where Bakugo had landed a particularly nasty explosion. Come on, Izuku thought desperately as another explosion rocked him back. This quirk has to do something besides change my eye color. Please. As if responding to his plea, the pain in his head suddenly shifted. The throbbing didn't disappear. Instead, it crystallized into sharp clarity, like a lens focusing. The world took on a reddish tint, but everything seemed clearer, more defined. Time didn't slow down, but somehow Izuku could take in more details, process more information. Bakugo launched another attack, but this time, something was different. Izuku could see the subtle shift of weight that telegraphed the punch, the slight angle of his hips that predicted an explosion would follow. It wasn't that Bakugo was moving slower, Izuku was just seeing more. Memories began flooding his mind, but not in the usual chaotic rush. Each incident of bullying, every confrontation, every fight, they arranged themselves like pages in one of his hero journals, clinical and clear. He could see patterns now, how 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 always led with his right when he was truly angry, how his bigger explosions required a specific finger placement, how his shoulders tensed before a feint. I've been watching him for years, Izuku realized, sidestepping a blast that would have caught him minutes ago. All those notes I took, all those times I analyzed his quirk, I wasn't just fanboying. I was learning. The next punch came exactly as Izuku predicted. Right hand, shoulders tense, fingers splayed for an explosion. Instead of blocking or taking the hit, Izuku simply wasn't there anymore. 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's eyes widened as his fist met empty air. "What the F?" 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 snarled, frustration evident in his voice. "Stop moving, you DMN nerd." But Izuku could see everything now. Each attack was a page from his mental notebook, each movement a diagram he'd drawn years ago. The rage still burned hot in his chest, but it felt focused now, controlled. His new vision didn't just show him the present, it showed him patterns, possibilities, predictions. Is this what true analysis feels like? Izuku wondered, ducking under another explosion. Not just watching and taking notes, but truly understanding. 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's next explosion came wild and fast, but this time Izuku saw it coming. His body moved before his mind could catch up, deflecting the blast with his forearm. The heat seared his skin, but the impact wasn't as devastating as before. "The hell?" 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 growled, genuine confusion crossing his face. "Since when could you?" Izuku didn't let him finish. He stepped in, blocking another explosion and landing a solid hit to 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's ribs. His technique was raw, unpracticed, nothing like 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's street-hardened style, but there was power behind it. Months of hauling refrigerators and lifting weights had changed more than just his endurance. "I can see it," Izuku realized, his red-tinted vision tracking every movement. Every time he uses his quirk, there's a pattern. His parries were still clumsy, and 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's follow-up strikes often caught him. An explosion grazed his shoulder, another caught his hip, but Izuku kept pressing forward. Each successful block, each landed punch, seemed to fuel something inside him, that deep well of red-hot emotion that didn't feel entirely his own. "Think you're tough now, Deku?" 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 spat, BLD speckling his teeth. Finally grew a spine after all these years. The taunt hit something deep inside Izuku. Years of mockery, of pain, of being told he was worthless, it all came rushing back, but not as memories of fear. This time they fed the rage. All those years. Something snapped. The red in his vision intensified, and suddenly Izuku wasn't thinking anymore. His body moved on pure instinct and fury. He launched forward, catching 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 mid-explosion with a wild haymaker that connected solidly with his jaw. Before 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 could recover, Izuku was on him, throwing punch after reckless punch. They went down hard, Izuku on top, still swinging. His knuckles split against 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's face, but he barely felt it. All those years of analysis, of careful observation, they transformed into pure aggressive force. He wasn't fighting like a hero or even a street brawler. He was fighting like someone who'd finally had enough. "𝐷𝐻𝐿, 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽's words cut off as another punch landed. He raised his arms to shield his face, explosions weakening, becoming defensive rather than aggressive. The look on his face was of pure shock. "You have a 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽, that sight 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 actually covering up, actually defending," broke through Izuku's rage. He froze, fist raised, suddenly aware of his burning knuckles and the ragged sound of both their breathing. His vision cleared slightly, though the red tint remained. "What am I doing?" A part of Izuku, from that deep dark well, screamed for him to continue. To feed his rage, to relish this gift, this power. Izuku shook his head. Slowly, deliberately, Izuku lowered his fist and stood up. 𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐽 remained on the ground, arms still raised slightly, watching him with an expression Izuku had never seen before, wariness. "You're not worth it," Izuku said quietly, his voice raw. "This power, I won't use it like this. If you really want to go to you, if you really want to be a hero." He took a shaky breath. "Start acting like one instead of a common thug." Bakugo's eyes widened, but for once, he didn't immediately snap back with a retort. Izuku knelt down, carefully gathering the torn pieces of All Might's card. His hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. That deep well of anger was still there, still burning, but somehow more controlled now that he'd acknowledged its existence. Without another word, he turned and limped away, leaving Bakugo on the ground. Each step felt heavy with the weight of what had just happened, but his spine remained straight. The red tint in his vision slowly faded, but something told him it would return, and next time, he'd be more prepared for it. This power isn't for revenge, he thought firmly. It's for becoming a hero. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. The sound of conflict cut through the evening quiet like a thunderclap. 𝗧𝗟 paused mid-step, his gaunt frame tensing at the unmistakable sound of Bakugo's explosions. The peaceful neighborhood around Takoba Beach, usually silent save for crickets and distant waves, erupted with voices and the distinctive pop of a combat quirk. Young Midoriya. His body moved before his mind could catch up, years of hero work taking over. He slipped behind a parked car, his skeletal form providing perfect concealment in the growing darkness. The scene before him made his hollow chest ache. "Think you're better than me now, Deku?" Bakugo's voice carried clearly, dripping with venom. Each word was punctuated by small explosions, like exclamation points made of nitroglycerin. He was my hero first. Something hot and protective flared in 𝗧𝗟's chest. He'd seen bullying before. It came with the territory of being a teacher and hero, but watching it happen to his chosen successor struck differently. His fingers tightened on the car's frame, leaving slight indentations in the metal. I should stop this. Before, but a deeper instinct held him back. The part of him that had been the symbol of peace for decades, that had carried one for all through countless battles, whispered, "Watch. You need to see this." The sound of tearing paper made him wince. Even from this distance, he could see young Midoriya's face transform. Something shifted in the boy's eyes, literally shifted, the green bleeding into that mysterious red that had first appeared during the sludge villain incident. That quirk again, 𝗧𝗟 thought, watching as Izuku took Bakugo's first punch without falling. But what is it really doing to him? The fight that followed was painful to watch. Every blow that landed on young Midoriya felt like it struck 𝗧𝗟 himself. His hand kept straying to his pocket, where he could still transform into All Might for a few precious seconds. It would be so easy to step in to stop this. But if I do, what then? When he has one for all, will I always be there to step in? He watched as Izuku struggled, obviously outmatched by Bakugo's aggressive style. But something was happening. Each time those eyes flashed red, Izuku's movements became more precise, more calculated. It wasn't just improved reaction time, the boy was learning, adapting mid-fight. The quirk isn't just changing his eye color, 𝗧𝗟 realized. It's enhancing his analytical abilities somehow. Like his natural talent for observation is being amplified. But it wasn't just the physical changes that caught his attention. There was something in young Midoriya's face, a darkness that seemed to surface with each flash of red. That mysterious quirk seemed to tap into something deep and volatile. Can I really give one for all to someone carrying such rage? The thought chilled him. Even if it's justified rage, even if he's earned the right to it. The power I carry isn't meant for vengeance. When Izuku finally gained the upper hand, when he straddled young Bakugo and started throwing punches, 𝗧𝗟's muscles coiled. Steam began rising from his body, the transformation already beginning. If Midoriya went too far, if he let that rage consume him. I'm sorry, young man, but if you cross that line, I'll have to. But Izuku stopped. Even with his opponent at his mercy, even with years of trauma and that mysterious power coursing through him, he stopped. Not just stopped, but stood up, delivered words that could have been punches but chose to be lessons instead. Start acting like a hero instead of a common thug. The steam dissipated from 𝗧𝗟's body. Relief flooded through him, followed by something warmer, pride. You chose to be better, he thought, watching his successor gather the torn pieces of his gift. Even without me stepping in, even without anyone watching, you chose the harder path. As Izuku walked away, leaving young Bakugo on the ground, 𝗧𝗟 remained hidden. His mind was already racing with new training plans. Clearly, combat instruction needed to be moved up the schedule. But more importantly, he felt a renewed certainty about his choice of successor. That darkness in you, young Midoriya. It's not a flaw. It's a reminder. A reminder of why you want to be a hero in the first place. His gaze shifted to Bakugo, still on the ground, watching Izuku's retreating form with an unreadable expression. Another soul in need of guidance, though perhaps of a different kind. Two young men carrying such heavy burdens, Toshinori mused. One drowning in his own rage, the other learning to channel his. Both needing help in their own ways. The responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. Not just for passing on one for all, but for guiding these young souls toward becoming true heroes. Young Midoriya would need training, not just in combat, but in handling that mysterious power that seemed tied to his deepest emotions. And young Bakugo. Perhaps there was still hope for him to learn what true strength meant. The path to becoming the symbol of peace isn't just about power, Toshinori thought, finally turning away from the scene. It's about choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. You showed me that tonight, young Midoriya. You showed me I chose well.